cities have any like on the same day.
Oh, you have a bunch of different cities. that do it.
Just 3,
Oh,
but
yeah,
it,
that's still a
we
lot.
thought we were being, very cautious and conservative by just doing 3, but it's a handful.
Oh, yeah. I don't have a whole plan, so that's great. This is one.
Yeah, when Rob first called, I said we were too busy to do it. But he really I have a soft spot for kids. So.
Yeah.
And history, of course.
Yeah, this new working.
Oh, yeah.
Did their last house.
In one way or another, Okay, that's not just. Yeah, yeah. Very nice.
Municipal clerk. Yeah, it's a proclamation. That's right, it is.
Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call to attention the Planning Commission special meeting for the City of Campbell, May the 4th, 2022. Madam Clerk, if we could have a roll call, please.
Commissioner Rivlin.
Present.
Commissioner Zisser.
Here.
Commissioner Ostrowski. Commissioner Kamkar.
Here.
Commissioner Cray.
Here.
Vice Chair Buckbinder.
Present.
Chair Ching.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. There's no minutes for this meeting. I believe communications agenda modifications, we have one, potentially two items.
Yeah, just note for the commission lobbyist to a community development director, we had a desk item go out yesterday, quite lengthy, and in part of our presentation, we'll walk you through it. And then just about an hour or two ago, at the request of Vice Chair Buckbinder, passed on an email that had some information on one of the items tonight. Want to make sure you got that also.
Okay, thank you. I think we'll go through the only item. Vice Chair Buckbinder and myself are having a little chat, so we've got a proposal to give to the commission, but maybe I'll do that on the agenda item. So oral requests. This is the point of the agenda where members of the public may address the commission on items of concern to the community that are not listed on the agenda this evening. People may speak up to 5 minutes on any matter concerning the commission. So, do we see any hands on Zoom?
If you'd like to provide comment under oral requests, can you please raise your virtual hand?
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. So I'll close that. Moving on to the first and only agenda item for tonight. And this is PLN 2021-12, review and provide recommendations to the City Council on the modified and refined objectives, policies and programs to be included in the draft Campbell's plan for housing to be published later in 2022. Just before I hand it over to Director Eastwood, Vice Chair Bookbinder, you may have seen submitted a desk item on parking, which was
among other things.
Yeah, it was hence a very comprehensive list of items. Since it was, I think, submitted relatively recently, just before the meeting, and I think there's a lot of good content in there. To try to do it justice, I think we can raise it tonight to acknowledge it at the relevant point, and I think the Vice Chair has spoken to Director Eastwood on that. But what I propose to the Commission, and potentially look for volunteers here, is we agendarize this for another meeting, and to put it in a format which is a presentation format of maybe a few slides. So it's type of more consumable and we can understand it. It also gives us a chance to think about it for another meeting, but in a time context that is still relevant for this housing review. So I know Vice Chair Bookbinder is up for that. What might be good is we have a volunteer from another commissioner who would like to work with the Vice Chair on producing that presentation.
I will be happy to help,
Thank you. That'll be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll move to agendize the missing middle. Is this the topic we would like to agendize for a future date? Or should we wait till after our first item this evening? Chair Ching.
Good question on top of. Thank you for the proposal. I was looking to maybe Director to advise here.
We were just talking if you needed to make a formal ad hoc subcommittee, but it doesn't seem to be necessary. So at your will, if you'd like to schedule it in the future, let us know how staff can support.
Okay.
Thank you.
So do we need to raise that as just an official request per Commissioner Rivlin to agendarize that for a future date?
Yes.
Okay.
So I still move to agendize.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
In a future date, and I direct staff in that. I know we're not out of work here, but direct staff to pick a date that would make sense for this process.
Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Commissioner Bookbinder, Kemkar and Vice Chair for that. It'd be great. Looking forward to it. So moving on to that item, I'll hand over to staff and Director Eastwood. And welcome back, Commissioner Ostrowski. Good to see you again. Hope you're feeling better.
Okay, so first off, I'll just go ahead and give
Director Eastwood, I'm sorry.
Yes.
Can we just get a either a voice vote or a roll call vote for that motion?
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Either or, all in favor?
Yeah,
would be
all in
okay?
favor. First of all, I'll second.
I think we
I
have
think
a,
Commissioner Cray already did.
We have the second.
So we have a third as well.
You can just say all in favor.
So shall we just have a voice vote?
all in
Aye.
favor is fine, yeah.
All in favour?
Aye.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
I'm abstaining.
Okay, great. Okay, so for item tonight, should be no surprise. This is part two in a two-part series. First part started last month. I'll start with introductions. In addition to myself, Rob Eastwood, Community Development Director, supported tonight by staff working from home. You'll see Stephen Rose online. He's zooming in. And we have two members of M Group, who's our housing consultant. One is Jeff Bradley, who's elevated to sitting at the staff table here tonight and ready to support. And also Brittany Bendix is coming in from home, and she'll actually be handling most of the presentation. So with that, we'll go ahead and start. Overall structure for tonight, and Chair Ching and I talked, we'll be presenting the information in a couple parts. We'll stop early on for comments after you hear some information on council direction from the last meeting. After that, a lot of material that we'll present to you, and then we're recommending at that point, again, stop again after that. Any questions, public feedback. And then we have a suggested way to structurally go through the information and provide feedback. I'll go into more, but staff is recommending kind of the high points to bring to you, to show you tonight, to get feedback on. But again, if any of the commissioners would like to highlight any parts of the material they'd like to discuss, anything out of the material, we'd be ready to discuss it. So with that, what you have before you is the outline of our presentation for tonight. Next. So overall, you've seen this a lot of times, just overall reminding our audience and the commission where we're at. Our overall goal is to get in housing element adopted by the end of this year, certified by Housing Community Development by January. We're at a pretty critical stage. After this meeting and the council meeting, our intent is to take all your feedback, put it into the draft housing element that'll be published in late May. And that'll go through a 30-day review process. And after that, it will be submitted for a preliminary review by the state. So we are pretty close to a key milestone in staying on that overall schedule. Next. One thing that's in your packet is we just want to give you a glimpse of what the draft housing element will look like and what's inside of it. Right now, our housing consultants, while they're not attending this meeting, are furiously writing it, and we're reviewing it. But to give you a sense of the outline, these are the key sections that will be in the draft housing element. A lot of the things you're talking about tonight will be fed into it. That's the policies and programs, the housing opportunity sites. You'll remember that very robust discussion in late fall and January. And then a lot of background material on housing needs in Campbell will also be in that document. But you'll see as one of the attachments, just an example of that outline. So the commission and the council has a sense of the structure of the draft housing element before it's put out for public review. Next. So tonight, it's pretty similar to the last meeting. If you remember, the last meeting we presented policies and programs, and we obtained your feedback on should they be high priority, medium priority, low priority. And you had provided that, and we had given that to council. First, we're going to report back to you. Council had made some adjustments after hearing from staff and commission's recommendations. And then after that, the most of this meeting is just going deeper into these policies and programs. So more details on where we could go with them, some policy direction on how you formulate, say, modified or inclusionary housing ordinance or an affordable housing overlay zone, more information on how we address special needs, affirmatively further fair housing. So our intent tonight is to get you a little deeper into the direction. Some of the reason for that is the state has a very, very high bar on how you present policies, programs, and implementation details. So as we move forward into a draft, we want to make sure we start to get down to that level of detail, show them to you in the council before we put them in the draft document. There's a lot of policies and programs, so it's in your packet. What staff is trying to do in the presentation tonight is highlight what we think are the more substantial areas that you'd like to discuss. But again, out of everything you've received, we're more than ready to discuss any of the items you've gotten. A little background on how we got here. This wasn't done in a vacuum. How do we develop the policies and programs? Of course, first we looked at our existing housing element, what's working, what's not. We looked at the uniqueness of Campbell, special needs populations, demographics, housing trends. Did a lot more outreach, and you'll see in your packet between the last meeting and this meeting, we went back out, talked once more with one of the school districts, had two housing roundtable meetings, one with market rate developers, one with affordable rate developers. We had really good feedback on affordable housing programs and parking standards, which is put in your packet. And we took all of that and put it into the recommended policies and programs that you have before you tonight. Next. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Brittany. And what we're going to do next is just walk you through, get you up to speed on the council feedback from last time, how they changed some recommendations, and then we'll continue from there. So off to you, Brittany.
Yeah, thanks, Director Eastwood. Good evening, Commissioners. I'm Brittany Bendix, Principal Planner with M Group. I'll give a general I'm sorry?
Oh, we're just adjusting the volume. Go ahead.
I'll give a general summary of the City Council feedback received on April 20th, And then we'll have an opportunity for questions on that feedback before we jump into a more detailed policy discussion. So after the housing element team presented potential policies and programs for the housing element to the Planning Commission on April 12th, the same package of options was presented to the council for consideration at a special meeting on April 20th. In general, the City Council, Planning Commission, and planning staff had consensus on 17 of the 25 items. However, there were some changes, and the purpose of this slide is to highlight changes that track in your staff report. There were 3 items removed. 1F, which would have required deed restrictions on ADUs. The general consensus from the Planning Commission and City Council was that such a policy could inhibit ADU development and present implementation and monitoring challenges. Staff agreed and removed this item. Number 2A, which would have prioritized a rent control requirement that exceeds the state's new laws, that was also removed. However, I've kept an asterisk here because staff is proposing a rent control ordinance specific to units that are below market rate, what we call BMRs, that I will discuss further tonight. And then 5C, which would craft incentives to construct ADUs dedicated to individuals with special needs. This was also removed. Concerns here echoed the challenges with deed restriction requirements on ADUs that we heard on item 1F. We did add an item. Item 1K was added at the recommendation of Councilmember Lopez with the intent that the city strategically interface with the state legislature with the goal of being more proactive in responding to state housing legislation. And then there were 8 items that were elevated in priority based on feedback from the council. These include 1G, publishing pre-approved ADU plans that went from moderate to high. 1J, developing a missing middle ordinance, also went from moderate to high. 2B, preservation of mobile home parks, that went from low to high. 3B and C, which address permit streamlining and impact fee adjustments for affordable housing projects, that elevated from low to high, but only for aspects of that programming that would relate to implementation of an affordable housing overlay zone. And then similarly for A and B, which are the 2 resilient housing policies, these were elevated from low to high in an effort to recognize the work that's occurring specific to the objective standards update, the pursuit of a climate action plan, and anticipation of new REACH codes pending the 2023 building code update. And then finally, 5F, which applies to the city's provision of multilingual information on housing programs. This was elevated to a high priority, although staff does recognize that this is an ongoing effort. At this point, I'm going to pause briefly just in case there are any questions commission specific to the council feedback that was relayed into the staff report. If not, I can move on.
Please.
So the addition of the strategically interfacing with the state legislature, I mean, is that even appropriate to be in a housing element?
Well, without making any value judgment, I think to give voice behind one of our council members, I think his thought is every year there's new housing bills that are coming along. And you've seen this trend, SB 9 and others. And to really thoughtfully either A, engage with our legislators on how Campbell and other cities can craft, how those are crafted, number 1. And number 2, to get ahead on when those bills are adopted, so we're not too far behind, and incorporate them into our ordinances in the right way. So,
I mean, I don't think it's a bad thing. I just don't know. I guess my question is whether it should be in the housing element or that should be something that the council takes on as a requirement for what they do. You know, it's like lobbying the state legislature or working with the state legislature. It's like, I would assume that's what they do. I just don't know if it is an element of the housing element. I mean, it just seems a little different than, you know, what list the housing element is, which is very specific, you know, objectives and you know, as we've gone over for the last 6 months. So it just seems odd. That's all. And I get that, you know, Councilman Lopez is interested in making sure that, we do our due diligence with the state. But I just didn't know whether this is an element that would be expected to be in the
Sure. The only thing I'll add is it is a bit atypical from other elements, which are policies and programs to produce housing units. So I just think the thought was there to be strategic about how we interface with the state. And I'd say between now and the end of the year, we'll think about a way to craft it that embodies his intent, but meets the housing programs.
Any more questions?
I'm sorry, I did have a question. Have we talked about workforce?
And just to clarify, is this it was the CCP JPA workforce opportunity housing, Commissioner Kamkar, is that correct?
I think so. I think it's item D on page 15 of 24 on our agenda. Opportunity housing, and that's, workforce housing program.
Right. So I can report this, since at this point we're just reporting out what happened at City Council, and we can come back to it later with more details on it. We did actually have a presentation on council that was a bit more detailed than what the commission got on workforce housing. The reason for that, we have a group that operates in the workforce housing that was wanting to move forward in the next month or two with an opportunity. At that council meeting, they actually did present and talked about their business model a bit. At the end, the council did not reprioritize the item and tell staff to make it a near-term item.
Thank you for that. That's what my question was, and for clarity, I did meet with I guess one of the consultants, Jim Canine, and he was asking about that. So it seems like in our explanation as to why we're not hiring the priority is that we don't want the city's revenue to be undercut, which makes perfect sense. And if that's the case, then I think we're making the right move. But Jim was saying that it won't be undercut. They would get paid whatever they would have gotten paid. And do we know if it's not undercut and we provide housing for our own workforce, that's a win-win. That should be like one of the lowest hanging fruit,
Yeah, the other thing I offer, number one, it's a new program. Number two, they have a very layered financial model. So there's two parts to it. One is the properties become exempt from property tax. So school districts, counties, cities don't receive property tax. That's a fiscal consideration. Two, they put out non-taxable government bonds to leverage buying these projects and buying down the affordability. We've done a lot of research on it. Stephen Rose specifically did a lot of research with other jurisdictions. I think staff's consensus is there's still a lot of questions on the effectiveness of the program. And because there are questions and we're focusing on a lot of other tried and true programs, we thought we would wait until that due diligence was done. So
clarity comes.
Exactly.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Just to be clear, these are just questions on what we're being told about what the city council did?
Correct.
Just want to make sure I don't miss anything. Okay.
Just had one. A lot of objectives got raised to high priority. Do we know what the split is now between high, medium, and low? Is everything high? Maybe an unfair question. It seemed a lot.
I don't know if Brittany or Stephen want to walk into this. They're all more in the high category. There is the adage, if everything's a high priority, nothing's a priority. We'll have to think about the right structure. I think the high we have the first 2 to 3 years, even within that, you'll see in the tables, we're putting things to start first, but there are a fair amount that have moved up into a higher priority.
Okay.
I can add that part of the justification that the council gave for raising things to high priorities was that they felt like they were things that staff was already working on. Like there was a conversation about why aren't you including resilient design as a higher priority if you're saying here that it's covered under the objective design standard effort. And so that's why we were careful when we were giving you this summary just now to indicate that, well, yeah, it's partially high, but it might be lower if it's not already tackled in those other programs.
Thank you. I think that's the questions.
Okay, go ahead and continue, Brittany.
Okay. There are currently 5 objectives that frame policies and programs for the 6th cycle housing element. Over the past several weeks, we've worked with the Public Planning Commission and City Council to consider what these objectives should address in the policies and programs to facilitate their success. The 5 objectives are: 1, to improve housing affordability in Campbell and encourage the production of affordable housing; 2, to preserve existing housing and affordable housing stock; 3, to remove government constraints to housing; 4, to provide resilient housing policies; and 5, to affirmatively further fair housing and address special needs. While the focus of previous presentations have been crafting the policy and program language that will meet the city's goals, the expectation of the state is that the Campbell's Plan for Housing will express these efforts with defined targets, responsible parties, funding sources, and a time frame for anticipated completion. The example provided here is a program that provides pre-approved ADU plans. It's specifically taken from program H1F in the table provided as Exhibit A in the desk item that you received yesterday. It includes specific programming language in the first column and indicates that there isn't any existing text from the 5th cycle in the second column. It then identifies the implementing action as publishing pre-approved plans on the website with the targets of providing at least 5 plan sets, of which 2 would be ADA compliant or address senior housing needs, and indicates the channels through which this information would be shared. The table also lists the City Housing Division and the Santa Clara County Housing Collaborative as the 2 responsible parties that will achieve this effort by the end of December 2026 with funding from the community development budget. More broadly speaking, staff understands that the state will also expect details on efforts to affirmatively further fair housing, indicating how programs and policies will achieve these goals. This will be covered in Chapter 4 of the housing element that requires identification and prioritization of contributing factors to AFFH issues. We've included that definition here. A contributing factor is a factor that creates, contributes to, perpetuates, or increases the severity of one or more fair housing issues. Additionally, we must include actions to mitigate contributing factors, which must be specific with timelines, discrete steps, and measurable outcomes to have a beneficial impact during the planning period. So now I'll go over the desk item materials that you received yesterday. In the prior example of the pre-approved ADU plans, I noted the policy table that the commission received as Exhibit A. This is a draft table, but it reflects the full framework of information required by the state. It includes the policies we've discussed here previously and that we've addressed in the staff report, as well as new policies and programs that bolster AFFH efforts that we received after additional outreach. And then it also includes carryover policies and programs from the 5th cycle housing element with updated language as necessary. Other exhibits received in yesterday's desk item include Exhibit B, which is a summary table of the new AFFH policies and programs that were included in Exhibit A, but there they were shaded in a light gray to be more tractable when you're looking at the whole master list. We also included Exhibit C and D, which include an overview of the additional outreach received from both affordable and market rate housing developers that was also factored into staff's recommendations. And of course, with this being an ongoing effort, the team has caught a couple of changes necessary since publication of the table. The first relates to rent control policies. As I previously mentioned, and which is addressed in the staff report, staff removed the rent control policy consideration given the consensus from the Planning Commission and the City Council not to exceed the state standards. And while staff is in agreement with this approach, it recently became evident that the state law does not cap yearly rent increases to below market rate units. So staff is recommending that the city adopt a policy that takes the state's general rent control protections and extends them to the BMR units in Campbell. Staff is also proposing modifications to policy H1.4 in Exhibit A. This language addresses the minimum density requirement for housing developments and serves to update a policy from the fifth cycle element. However, when drafting the table, a key component of the policy was dropped. This relates to the requiring all residential densities to achieve 75% of the maximum general plan land use density. And you can see the track changes in the column on the left here. As a reminder, tonight's meeting is feedback oriented. So at this time, the planning commissioners would need to indicate support, concerns, or questions on these approaches. After tonight, this language would be then included in the draft table moving forward to City Council for consideration. So at this point, I'm going to focus specifically on policies and programs that improve housing affordability in Campbell. During the past few days, staff has also created this table, which identifies the total number of BMR units as a range that could be expected as a result of the various housing programs listed in Exhibit A. For example, construction of on-site BMR housing units in the inclusionary housing program would result in 500 up to 750 units. Through in lieu fees, the program could provide up to 70 units. Commercial linkage fees up to 20 units. The Affordable Housing Overlay, or AHOS, could result in up to 370 units. ADU programs on top of the baseline amount anticipated could be up to 200. And the two efforts under consideration for using city-owned land would garner up to 300 units, while other programs are estimated to gain up to another 150. So in total, the programs included in Exhibit A would result in 1,290 units up to 1,860 units, where the city's RENA target is 1,685. Of course, this is an estimate based on certain assumptions. Raising fees or shifting incentives could alter anticipated production. And so the details of these programs, especially those that generate the majority of units, such as the Inclusionary Ordinance, the AHOS, and the use of city-owned land are really important when we're looking at these holistically. So to further our discussion and look at more in-depth policy and programs, I'm going to turn it over to Campbell Stephen Rose now, who will walk you through staff's current thoughts on the AHOS program and give you a sense of what that would look like.
So on the screen here, we actually have an exhibit showing, it's a sample program. First and foremost, I'll caveat it to say that there's probably a number of items which we might change in the formal adoption of an AHOS, but it's meant to help illustrate how a locally adopted affordable housing overlay zone could be competitive with a state density bonus project. So what this table is indicating in terms of eligibility, first and foremost, we would require that in order to propose an AHOS project, you'd have to be within our AHOS zone, which we actually have a figure in the staff report indicating locations. You would also have to meet state affordability requirements. That's in terms of like constituting what level and what type of affordability means, like low or very low. Further, you must meet any special needs requirements the city were to identify. Like if we wanted to have a policy that said you need to provide a certain percentage for senior housing or a certain percentage for disabled communities, that would be something certainly we could address as part of our local AHOS. Just as a single example, we took a case study project of a 75 unit to acre, 75 dwelling unit to gross acre site with a 1 acre lot size. And we qualified it saying that in order to be within the local AHAs, you'd have to be 30% affordable in targeted RHNA categories. The exact mix between very low, low, and moderate, we didn't specify. It's something that we'd need to study further to make sure that our program is competitive while also not being too generous. But some type of mix there, like 20% moderate, 5% low, very low, would be the ultimate allocation of affordability. And with that project in mind, they would qualify for a minimally a 5% density bonus above and beyond what you'd otherwise get by state density bonus law. So in this particular example, a qualifying project might come in at 50%. If they met our criteria, they might receive a 55% bonus, resulting in a greater number of units. In our scenario, 116 to 112 by state density bonus law. Not a lot there, but on different projects, the delta might be even greater. And in exchange for, again, following the city's affordable housing overlay zone, you'd also receive a number of benefits. And we identified just a few case studies here. For instance, we might consider allowing for city-funded frontage improvements, either a waiver or reduction in building permit and planning application fees. Jumping down a little bit further in the table, we're also considering allowing for ministerial review. And we would also consider allowing the same number of concessions and waivers that you would otherwise get by state density bonus law. Another separate objective of the local affordable housing overlay zone would be to help ensure projects stay under a 75-foot height limit. So that's actually one thing that you could actually specify. So if there's any local preferences that you'd like to control, like height or like meeting a special needs population requirement, you could have those program objectives specified within the local affordable housing overlay zone. So just high level, we just wanted to highlight, provide a little bit more of a practical example of how this program might play out, while understanding that we're open to feedback on exactly what the specific priorities and policies would be. And yeah, so just in terms of what this is showing here is the parking standard. So staff's initial crack at it was to take whatever the parking standards that you would otherwise get as a density bonus project. This is just illustrating what they are for just a generally standard project or a project within a fourth mile of a light rail station or highly qualified transit stop, and how that would also apply. So again, parking you wouldn't be you'd get the same benefits as a density bonus project. Again, the idea being to make sure that we're being competitive. And on the screen here, this is actually the targeted affordable housing overlay zone locations. We actually broke these up into two priority sets. So green being high priority, which we consider to be the low hanging fruit, the ones which we thought would receive more universal support. Those include the Winchester VTA station, as well as Summer Winds and an additional, I believe it's a Hertz rental car site in the middle of the map here. You have Fry's Electronics, you have the Prune Yard, and you have a number of additional properties kind of approaching the corner of Hamilton and Bascom Avenue. On the secondary priority list, we included Campbell Technology Park, as well as 700 West Hamilton Avenue, which is the Culinary Arts Center.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. The next program we'll look at is H1D in Exhibit A, and that addresses average maximum unit size. Given the Commission and Council support for this approach, staff is providing two options for consideration. The first establishes an average maximum unit size of 1,250 square feet for projects with a density over 45 dwelling units per acre. Given developer feedback, however, they indicated that they would prefer a floor area ratio metric, or FAR, with a maximum approach. So staff is including that as a second option for projects that have a density of over 45 dwelling units. However, as noted on page 9 of the staff report, the state does restrict the maximum FAR on projects depending on the number of units proposed. So the next policy area that we'll look at from here is reducing government constraints. Relative to this effort, staff is also supportive of reducing parking standards, but we have heard concerns about what that means and how it would look like in a policy. So program H3A identifies recommended code updates that would include reducing the parking requirements near transit, providing incentives for reduced parking in the AOZ, or the AHAs, including a minor reduction of parking requirements citywide to require no more than 2 parking spaces per unit, removing guest parking requirements, and allowing parking to be unbundled from residential units. The next series of slides address policies and programs that staff is recommending with AFFH requirements in mind. Specifically, how Campbell can address special needs groups that are identified by the state as seniors, people with disabilities, including developmental disabilities, people experiencing homelessness, large families, and female-headed households, as well as farm workers. However, note that there are no identified farm worker families currently living in Campbell. And before we dive in, just a couple of reminders. First, that special needs groups overlap, and that's okay. One policy can serve multiple groups. Our purpose tonight is to highlight those groups most served so that we can ensure the unique needs are being met. And then second, that draft policies and programs are also designed to mitigate contributing factors, not just to provide for certain groups. So for seniors, we'd like to highlight programs H2K, H5Q, H5W, and H5Y. Collectively, these programs look to help fund senior home maintenance, provide physically accessible units, include support services in large housing projects, and provide renter support. For people with disabilities, including developmental disabilities, we've highlighted programs H5I, H5P, H5R, and H5W. These programs rely on coordination with regional agencies and affordable housing providers to provide supportive housing and services goals. Additionally, they support the construction of accessible housing and provide density bonuses for projects that include on-site staff housing. For people experiencing homelessness, we're highlighting programs H5H, H5O, H5R, and H5U. These programs serve to ensure that people experiencing homelessness have support services in the community as well as in larger housing developments, access to foreclosure prevention information, and access to temporary shelter facilities. Highlighted programs that serve large families and female-headed households include H2D, H2I, H5V, and H5Y. Collectively, these programs focus on collecting and distributing information to protect renters and inform them of their rights, and to facilitate new housing opportunities through workforce housing and density bonus programs. The last issue I'll highlight tonight is that of outreach. This is because a number of public-facing programs have outreach as a target element. Given this overlap, outreach for housing programs merits special attention. As currently proposed, many programs indicate that they will rely on at least 3 information channels, including the website, social media, local press, council announcements, and utility mailers. Additionally, programs requiring cooperation with landlords would rely on information sent through the business license renewal program. So at this point, I've concluded the bulk of my presentation, and we'd like to open it up to public comment. Once public comment is closed, we'll then turn it back to the Planning Commission for discussion and feedback. And just as a reminder, we do have a list of suggested topics to help facilitate that conversation as necessary. Once that portion of the night is concluded, we then have a couple more slides that will help you walk you through what to expect moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Brittany. We start with the Commissioner questions.
So you mentioned that for the regulation of housing unit sizes to increase affordability, that the developers preferred an FAR-based approach over the average maximum unit size restriction, and I was interested to understand why they had that preference.
I can hop in there. I was actually-
Jeff Bradley with M Group. Reading through the notes from the developer workshop, it looked like they were arguing for usage of an FAR to limit density rather than the traditional dwelling units per acre. Was sort of the dichotomy they were discussing. In my view, the policy around maximum average unit size is a good policy, regardless of whether we're talking about FAR or dwelling units per acre. So it really encourages a diversity of unit sizes and simply requires, if you want to do some really big penthouse units, you have to balance that out with some much smaller efficiency units. So it's not an absolute bar on larger units. It just requires some careful balancing, and overall, of course, the average unit size would be brought down somewhat than what pure market forces might demand. And Burlingame has had very good luck with it in the downtown area. They went from seeing lots of large, very expensive luxury units being replaced by smaller, not deed restricted affordable, but closer to affordable levels within the downtown planning area.
And if I may, I'll just add just 2 quick points on that as well. The developers are also stating that if the city's concern was to help control mass and bulk, that they felt FAR was a more industry standard approach than using a maximum average unit size. Not to say that we're not supportive of a average maximum unit size, but that was the commentary that was made. Second thing, we had done a local analysis of recent projects in the city of Campbell, including, say, Bay West and the St. Anton apartment buildings, to determine whether or not the imposition of an average unit size of, say, 1,250 square feet could result in any kind of difficulty or challenge to be met for housing developers. And in both of those projects which we looked at, the average unit size is closer to like 1,100 or even lower, as well as Alvin's Corner, I should mention. So we actually looked at 3 sites. And in all 3 scenarios, we were coming in under that average. So you still had a mixture of 3 and 4 bedroom units, but the average of the projects were all in line with our recommendation.
Thank you.
Okay.
On this average unit size, are we talking about this would apply to both affordable and market rate rentals or housing in general? So, or is there going to be a difference between those two?
I'll broadly state, in terms of our inclusionary housing ordinance, the way it's drafted, the way it reads right now is you need to provide a representative mix of below market rate housing units within your project mix, right? So you can't say allocate all of your below market rate units to the lowest to the smallest household sizes in a project. That might be something that the planning commission or city council could consider as like a concession as part of the affordable housing overlay zone, where you would allow for reduced unit sizes in exchange for greater number of units, that type of thing.
But my question really was, it's like, so if somebody comes in and wants to build market rate units, mostly, 100 and whatever it is of either rentals or condos, would this average size apply to those kinds of units as well as 100% affordable units?
The way the policy is currently written, and jump in, Stephen, if I get this wrong, but my understanding, the way the policy is drafted currently is it's keying off of density. So any housing project that came in at 45 dwelling units or above would be subject to the maximum average unit sizes.
That's correct. And the only other part I'd add is that these are maximum average unit sizes, which is to say that if a 100% affordable housing developer wanted to come in and propose a bunch of 600 square foot units, that would meet the requirement, because the maximum average is under 1,250 square feet. This is just preventing against the upper end of the echelon, you having a project come in at the 75 unit per acre, say standard, with a proposal for all 3,000 square foot, 4-bedroom units.
Commissioner Crane.
I'm on the same topic, not to beat a dead horse on this one, but I had that same question and I'm still really kind of confused. So we identified the need for some smaller units, which really is BMR because they're smaller units. And we looked at the Burlingame, 12,050 square feet. That's an average. And the developers are saying they want an FAR maximum instead. So we're asked by the staff, which I think is a good question, one or the other, I think, and I'm not sure. So I guess my question would be then, with the developer preference for the FAR max, what sort of average square footage can you envision? Would it be higher or lower, or are we still talking about the same? Is it really 6 of one, half dozen of the other? That's my question.
May
What
I,
I would,
Stephen?
go ahead, Jeff.
I'll go back to the point about whether we're talking about density per acre, units per acre, or FAR that controls the total building size. From an affordable housing perspective, there's a public policy interest in getting more units rather than less. And so within the FAR example, you could still have a development that maxed out its FAR, but if all units are really big, you're not going to get as many as if instead of having a maximum average unit size that holds it down. So the size of the units down to maximum average, and you get more units within the same FAR. So it's really not the maximum average unit size isn't really operating any differently within the FAR realm or within the density per units per acre construct.
Yeah, okay. I guess it's just I'm still trying to debate. I like the 1250 number because it's something we can identify with. And Burlingame did it, and with the FAR, we don't know what we're getting. It sounds like, but
well, you could do both. What I'm saying is you could do average maximum unit size with the traditional units per acre like we have here in Campbell, or you could do it with an FAR based approach as well, and it would accomplish the same thing.
Yeah, and if I may just add to that, I mean, what the maximum average unit size is also accomplishing is the idea of affordable by design, because you're kind of pushing down. I mean, in the scenario where you had very large units, you'd have generally less affordable units, especially in a market rate setting. So by compelling a developer to come in under an average, you're helping make sure that the unit sizes are achievable at a generally more acceptable market rate environment. Yeah, and to Jeff's point, absolutely, you could actually have both FAR and an average maximum unit size, and they both would almost accomplish two different things, right? Under the FAR scenario, you'd help capture those additional areas that aren't unit specific, like hallways or elevators or lobby areas that do eat away at your mass and bulk of a site, while also still ensuring that your average unit size stays under a certain threshold.
yeah. Well, thanks everybody. And just one other question on Brittany on one of the other charts about the BMR units that might come to realization, and we had commercial linkage fees 10 to 20 units only. Is that just, it seems like almost a very small amount. Why is that so small?
So I will let Stephen answer that, but if you'd like, I can put the table up if that's helpful.
That'd be great. Thanks, Brittany.
Big picture, while we're pulling up that slide, I'll just mention, so we did a quick analysis of what the average square foot of non-residential or commercial floor area had been built in the last 3 years. On average, it was about 12,000 square feet. So we're not building a ton of brand new big office buildings. I mean, the exceptions being we've got 1700 Dell Avenue, which is up and coming. That was the building that was caught on fire recently. We've got a new project coming there. And in preceding years, we had the 8x8 building, but just in the targeted range that we were looking at 1,200 square foot, 1,000, this is 12,000 square foot average was used. and multiplied against a standard which the city of Cupertino uses, which I believe is $20 a square foot, and then multiplied by the 8 years that our planning, our housing element planning period is for. And that came up with a dollar amount. I have it readily here. I think it's like $1.3 million, something like that, which we then divided by $100,000, which was the difference. The idea being that it's not the cost to construct an affordable unit, but it's usually the gap financing. It helps us bridge the gap to help make a unit affordable, which would have otherwise been a market rate unit. So with that, all of that math in play, we came out to that commercial linkage fee of projection of only having about 10 to 20 units. Now, obviously, in boom years where we're building a lot more commercial development, that number would be higher. In bad years, it might be lower, just based on the amount of money that we collect. But we just want to provide a conservative estimate for where we think it might fall. Obviously, if the city council, the city council were to adopt a higher linkage fee than say $20 a square foot, these numbers would also change.
So something to add for the commission. We were kind of on the fence on showing this table. I think it's really helpful because the whole point was to show, it's very hard to build affordable. If you looked at our current RENA cycle, Campbell has not built a lot of affordable units. I think we have just one program, inclusionary housing. And B, why it's so important to have so many programs that will produce different units. And so this was sort of a thought bubble at this point in the game to conceptualize, if we put all our programs forward, how far can we go? But to Stephen's point, on the other side, number one, we didn't want to get ahead of ourselves. I mean, the Nexus studies aren't done, the programs aren't adopted. But within that, we had a lot of broad assumptions. So I think take everything you see with a grain of salt, but the main point of the table was to put that to meet our RENA goals, we'll have to be aggressive in a lot of programs, if that's sort of the broad summary here. Maggie, I know you had a question.
Yeah, I was curious. So for all these estimates and all the assumptions that were taken into account, what is the kind of the time frame assumption?
Well, good question. So the reporting period will start next year. It goes till 2031. On the outset, we don't have a modified inclusionary housing ordinance and linkage ordinance. So I think within that, we're presuming a year or two plus to adoption, and then you'd shorten the time range on which it's effective. I'll look to Jeff and Stephen to verify that. But again, we assumed it would take a year or two to get these programs up and running. And then after that, you're looking at a shortened window, right? Only 5 or 6 years of actually projects paying fees and using that money for affordable housing development.
I really appreciate this.
Commissioner Craig, did
Sorry,
you
go
have-
ahead.
I just wanted to follow up on it. The same point about the broad assumption. Maggie asked about the time. Stephen and you, I think you just did it, but in terms of the cost for a BMR unit, I know that in one of our earliest workshops, we had nonprofit developers quote a price of $250,000 to $300,000 per unit of government funding needed for projects to pencil out. So what dollar amount did you use in your calculations for the BMR units in this table?
Well, I'll offer, I mean, for the purposes of this table, we're using $100,000 as a rough benchmark, not for the construction of a unit, but to kind of bridge financing gaps. It's oftentimes, if the city were to provide funding, match funding or otherwise to certain affordable housing developers, it helps them bring a project to the community that wouldn't otherwise be possible. Now, in terms of the actual cost to construct a below market rate housing unit, it varies It varies broadly. We've heard everything from $95,000, I think, on the low end to like $650,000 on the high end. I think a recent study came out on the construction of an ADU to be about $400,000, which is, you're depending on all types of factors. What types of the condition of the interior, what type of construction, the density range we're talking about, the unit size, it's so highly qualified. So what I'd like to say is I wouldn't want to spend too much time understanding this table is a highly qualified table. It's something we're just trying to provide to help illustrate where we think that these programs might be bringing us, but understanding that more analysis will be required.
No, okay. No, I appreciate that, Stephen. And I just wanted to say before I forget, though, I know the staff did a hell of a lot of work in the last couple of weeks. I'm really a lot of good information on what I like about the report. I know we're asking questions, but what I like about the report is that we are talking about we're trying to get real units built here. So I like to see that. Thank you.
Commissioner Kamka.
Thank you, Chair. So a couple of commissioners asked about this item, but I just want to make sure I'm clear. We use the term average maximum, I guess, unit area, and then maximum average unit area. I just want to make sure these terms are synonymous and they refer to the average of the different unit areas cannot exceed certain maximum that we said. That's what
Correct.
we mean by it, right?
In my mind, the thing that makes the most sense would be maximum average unit size.
Exactly. On the, I think on our presentation, it was the other way around. And so it sort of confused me. So what do they mean? But, okay. Thank you. That was all.
Anybody else before I go to the Vice Chair? Yeah.
So a couple questions about this listing breakdown here, where we get up to 1,685 or 1,860 affordable units. So we're still at over 6,000 on our number, right, on RENA, in terms of including the, it's like double buffer, right? We're still up over, we have that number on the inventory, right? For total units.
For total units, correct.
We're up over 6,000. So, and our RENA number, whatever it is, 40 or 50% of them are supposed to be affordable units, right? I may be looking at this wrong. I'm a math guy, but sometimes my math gets wrong. So it would seem to me that our estimates, consistent with the numbers that we're starting with of over whatever it is, 6,500, that proportionately our estimate for affordable should be higher, should be up in the 2,000 range, rather than only 1,685 or 1,860 or whatever you want to take. I see what I'm getting at is like proportionally, we should be having a target that's proportional in terms of the buffer that we're the total numbers we're using and the percentage of affordable units. So that's one question. And then the other one was about picking the affordable housing overlay zone. The numbers based on the map, the numbers seem, modest. And then I would also question whether or not there's some additional parcels where should be in the overlay zone possibly. And so, I don't know if we need to discuss in detail today, but I understand. And then the other question I have also is, while I'm at it, is that we're trying to have this overlay zone to encourage people, among other things, to keep the height down to 75 feet or less. But yet, Prune Yard is probably an area where we should be less concerned about keeping the height down. So it seems to be, or even Fries.
So I'll break that into 3 parts, and I'll say we'll answer the question embedded in the first 2, and then ask commissioners this year maybe to hold on to the feedback part for the feedback portion of the meeting, if that's okay. On the, can we show the table again, Brittany and Stephen? On the breakdown, so 2 parts to this. The unit count you see at the bottom comes straight from ABAG, and that's the assignment to Campbell on how many BMR units we have to build. To your point, yes, what came out of January council meeting going into the IR is about 6,500 units, if I remember that. And if proportionally we build to our RENA numbers, half of those would be affordable. So So two points to that. One is yet to come between the commission and council if we stay at 6,500 or if it's comes at a lower number by the end of the year, and those will be further discussions. You could put that number in, but again, that's subject to further discussion. I think what we want to illustrate here, and again, it was the balance of thought bubble. Why is it so hard to build BMR units? Conceptually, why are we doing this, and why do we need to do this? Versus you get into the details and you get a little far ahead of yourselves. Is just to get to the state ABAG mandated number, we have to use all these programs. So to your point, and if you get into the feedback portion where the commission and council says, hey, in addition to that, how about think a bunch of more programs that could push us higher? That'd be a feedback that we would be open to hearing.
Thank you. Vice Chair, question? No, go to the Vice Chair. I'm just being aware of time as well here. We're just on the first item. So I'd rather get through everything, get everybody have a question and also a period for comment as well. So unless it's a burning question that we have here.
Sure. First, as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, the number of units produced via our inclusionary zoning program over the last 8 years is something like 12 units. This is a really huge increase. What are we basing that on?
Well, I mean, and if I may hop in here, I mean, it's taking, if we were to build all 5,000 units that we're anticipating and multiply that by a simple 15%, that gets you to 750. Knowing that the inclusionary ordinance won't necessarily trigger on the very first unit built, it might be at 5 units or 7. We have a lower end range of 500. I mean, all these numbers, there's a little bit of math and understanding one into them. To pick up on a prior comment made by Commissioner Zisser, the affordable housing overlay zone, the 270 to 370, I mean, that's backing out the units which are in the inclusionary housing ordinance as well. So we're not trying to double count units where you might otherwise be getting units from one program and not another. So it's trying to just show the big picture impact of each of these programs. And to Director Eastwood's prior comment, this understanding that where the probably, I mean, if you're looking at this table, my major takeaways are which of these items are which of these policies are the ones that make the biggest difference, right? So if you look at the ones with the biggest numbers, have the largest impact to our community, and yes, we need all of them in order to get to where we're headed.
And I really do appreciate this table really does illustrate that one program will not get us to our arena floor. I noticed that there's mention of group housing and SROs as allowed uses, but there's no mention of that in the explicit programs. Is there a plan to put that in part of, is that intended to be part of the affordable housing overlay zone proposal?
If you give me a minute, I'll pull up the matrix table, but actually maybe when we get a little bit later in the presentation, we can capture that.
I may have missed it.
We'll research that question and come back to you, Mr. Buckbinder.
Sure. Additionally, I can skip that question. On H1.4, we're saying all housing opportunity sites shall achieve 75% of planned density. What exactly does shall mean here? Does that mean we fall out of compliance if we fall below a 75% average?
It would be a policy, and we'd recommend, as the general plan housing element is adopted, that in the general plan land use designations, we would specify that those are the densities one must build to.
So I guess what happens if we build less than an average of 75%?
Yeah, I mean, so for example, if the general plan prescribed density on a site was 45 units per acre and a developer came in and proposed it at 20 units per acre, it would be rejected as not complying with Campbell's general plan. They would have to propose a project that meets that 75%.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
If I may, Director Eastwood, from a development review standpoint, it can also trigger a request for a general plan amendment Because when the city says your project's not consistent with the general plan because you're not meeting this policy for 75% density, the first reaction is, okay, fine. I want to change the general plan to a lower density, and then I will be compliant with it. And so that could be a sort of a consequence of this type of policy that we see in other communities. It's not a bad thing in itself, but just something to be aware of.
Right. In that case, that would trigger possible no net loss issues.
Probably SB 330, which doesn't allow you to downzone unless you upzone. So,
okay, that makes a lot more sense. Thank you. Those are the burning questions I had.
Thank you. Okay, I just had one quick question on the affordable housing. I think the proposal from our side was to make it ministerial review rather than standard process. If there was an objection from the public on ministerial review, what would be the process for resolving that objection?
and just to clarify, Chair Chang, if went through the process, well, there's a ministerial review and then there's you can still go to a hearing. So I guess is the question, if someone was to appeal a project that was approved by ministerial, what's the process? Yeah, well, my understanding, and again, we're still sorting out SB 35, where we had our first project that might be coming in. I don't think it abridges your appeal rights, but the discretion you have is generally taken away. So if that makes sense, you still could appeal, but the discretion you'd have over the project is very limited in the appeal hearing bodies.
Right, and the state allows the standard process, so it's Campbell that's recommending the ministerial process.
Yeah,
I think on the slide.
To Stephen and Jeff to put, I think the one, I'm trying to remember the policy, we have the one area where we're referencing state law that 100% affordable projects are ministerially approved.
Yeah, I think it was one of the slides. It was the one where it was also saying city funded frontage. That's the one.
If I may, through the chair, I think the best way to think of it is it's sort of in categories where we have sites that have been reused or recycled from the previous housing elements. Those under state law have to be subject to have an option for ministerial review. And so there's that bucket of sites. And typically in ministerial review, by definition, you don't have any hearings. You can have public meetings and hearings, but it's an odd exercise to have a group of discretion-making individuals being asked to make a ministerial decision. So it kind of creates a...
Yeah, I saw, and perhaps I'm just misreading this.
Yes, yeah.
The state density bonus law saying...
In the AHAs, it's seen as a possibility for an incentive or an inducement for affordable projects providing more affordability than they otherwise would, to offer that as an incentive, essentially, to take advantage of the local affordable housing program. So in that way, it's being used as an incentive to do it.
Yeah. So to remove the standard process and go to ministerial review.
Right.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Okay. Shall we move on to the next item?
Just real briefly, just to respond to Commissioner Buckbinder's prior point on the SRO program. So that's something that had been raised as a discussion point by one council member, but it didn't end up coalescing into a formal recommendation of the council or direction of the council. So there is not a policy within our housing policy or program matrix that addresses it. What we're indicating in the staff reports, this is page 9 of 24, the second paragraph, what we're indicating is that City Council could request that staff consider separate policies that allow for group housing SROs within certain zoning districts as a permitted use. It's kind of an open-ended suggestion that staff is making, that if a policymaker were to provide that direction, then we could evaluate doing it. I will offer that SROs are conditional use in many zoning districts as it stands right now. It just means that they need to go through a discretionary permit process to be allowed.
Thank you. Actually, it's my mistake. After the questions, I should open it up to the public hearing. Do we see anybody? Please.
full house, I'll give you company. So good evening, Planning Commission. My name is Enrique Navarro, and I'm with the Santa Clara County Association of Realtors as their Government Affairs Associate. And thank you for the time to speak. We take keen interest in housing elements in cities throughout our service area. And as such, I'm here to communicate to you our outlook on two particular sections of the objectives, policies, and programs under review tonight. The first being Objective 1, Section A. You're just touching on it recently, the modifications to the Inclusionary Ordinance. It's our general disposition that inclusionary ordinances increase the cost of all housing projects and make market rate housing more expensive. So please keep this in mind throughout the process of drafting the plan for housing. And the second item of interest is the Objective 5, Section B, renter protections. There was a mention there of just cause eviction, and we just want to mention that it's our position that though it means well, it adversely affects our housing providers who, by and large, strive for positive and healthy relationships with their tenants, who want nothing more than to work with their tenant situations, as it is in their interest to retain good tenants. 70% of our affordable housing providers locally are mom and pop, meaning kind of like 20 units or less. So we just want you to keep in mind of that. And that aside, we understand you as a planning commission in a prior meeting and the city council at the last session that they had weren't supportive of the rent control item beyond the state mandated. So we're thankful for that. And beyond that, we look forward to seeing how this plan develops further. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? I have one question. Actually, that clause or 5 point, could you tell me which is the renter protection?
Oh,
just
the
clause?
Objective 5, Section B. It was a page. Sorry, a lot of pages here. Yeah, page 21 and 24. Letter B there, it just said in the second line of that paragraph, unjust eviction. So that's what I was referring to.
Right, and could you expand on that, please?
On the just cause.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, no, I just noticed that it was there, so we just wanted to communicate that historically it's just been the case that the Realtor Association just doesn't support that. We work with a lot of landlords. I mean, a lot of our housing providers, as we prefer to refer to them. And obviously we communicate with a lot of realtors, and our experience with them has been that they feel that they could be a bit vilified in the process. Like, why do you need the so-called just cause? Like, it implies that they're not necessarily being fair. But there's a lot of I didn't come prepared with a lot of anecdotes. Unfortunately, I just came to make the quick remark. But generally speaking, from my own experience as well, I mean, for whatever it's worth, we do know that people do work in good faith, and we're hesitant to endorse like municipal or any kind of level of government mandate that would interfere in the relationship between a renter and housing provider. So.
Right. So just to be clear, the Realtor Association is against the just cause.
It's in our policy. It's in our policy pillars. Yeah.
That's yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Can I ask one quick question just while you're here? And I know because it's come up before, but the 70% of affordable landlords in Campbell are mom and pops. Is that documented, or
that's more of a county? That's more of a countywide regional figure that was passed me by my director.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've heard that figure before, and I just didn't know if that's a fact that's been documented.
Yeah, actually, well, I can give you my card, and I can get in touch if you want to find more about that. That was just kind of
okay. Yeah. Well, we'll look. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And what was the definition of the mom and pop?
So we've talked to the California Apartment Association before, regional contacts, and it's not really like hard line defined. The general idea is that if it's like under 20 units, and it's like not like if it's owned by somebody who's like kind of local, it's more of a qualitative concept than like a specific quantitative hard line. So yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Don't see anybody on Zoom, Madam Clerk.
We do have a few. Juliana Pendleton.
Hi, Julianne. Do you want to?
Good evening. Oh, hello. Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Juliana Pendleton, and I'm the Environmental Advocacy Assistant for Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society. One of our major areas of focus is on finding ways to reduce excess artificial light at night. Light pollution and excess artificial light at night affect virtually all species, including humans, bird migration, pollinators, and more. We believe including outdoor lighting guidelines within the housing element would help Campbell reduce light pollution and create a healthier environment for humans and wildlife. These guidelines could include shielding all lighting fixtures, using motion sensors or timers, requiring all fixtures to have a correlated color temperature of no more than 2700 Kelvin, and not including lighting near riparian corridors or other sensitive habitats. If you would like more information on this issue, please email advocate@scvas.org. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Please.
Question, how did you come up with the 2700 Kelvin?
Yes, so the 2700 Kelvin is a recommendation by the International Dark Sky Association. They are actually calling for closer to 2400 to 2200 Kelvin in sensitive habitats or near sensitive habitats and no lighting in sensitive habitats. We come up with 2700 Kelvin because that's what we have found to be the lowest correlated color temperature on the market available today. Ideally, we would like 2400 Kelvin, but we know that that's not really feasible at this time. But that's the temperature that really gives off that warmer glow that we used to see with a lot more traditional light sources. And then since we've converted more to LEDs, we get more of those brighter lights that have started with 5,000 to 6,000 Kelvin and are currently more between 3,000 and 4,000 Kelvin. But thank you for the question.
Would this apply to developers and residential housing, or this is more of a habitat type of development?
We are speaking within the housing element plan. We are thinking for these apartment complexes and residence developments. Light pollution is everywhere. It is pervasive. And so I think as cities and communities and counties, we really need to be thinking, where are we putting lighting and how can we make those guidelines better?
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question. Is there a standard to comply with? Like, is there something to include by reference in our housing element? Like a standard for, I guess, the International Dark Skies Association, do they have standards for environmentally reasonable lighting, for example?
Yes, the International Dark Sky Association does have guidelines available, and I can definitely send those your way for those references. To my knowledge, Campbell doesn't have any policies that would be guiding you at this time, but there are definitely guidelines out there from the IDA and the UN as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have the next one, please.
Yes, Kalisha Webster.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Kalisha Webster, and I am the Senior Housing Advocate at Housing Choices, a nonprofit service provider supporting San Andreas Regional Center consumers with developmental disabilities with finding and retaining affordable housing throughout Santa Clara County for the past 25 years. We want to thank staff and the consultants for the work you have done to create policies and programs which affirmatively further fair housing and encourage development of affordable housing. One important note we would like to make is that when creating policies to promote accessibility for people with disabilities, the city must recognize that there are a range of different types of disability beyond just physical disabilities, and the barriers to housing access can vary. For instance, for a person with a developmental disability, which can affect cognitive and behavioral functioning, or for an individual with a mental health disorder, the key to accessibility is coordinated on-site services. We also advocate for integration in typical affordable housing for a population that has historically been segregated in residential living facilities. We also would like to see the city go further in its commitment to house the most vulnerable populations at risk of homelessness and displacement, including people with developmental disabilities. As you consider changes to your inclusionary requirements, we recommend offering developers a range of options that meet city-specific goals, such as lowering the percentage of units required if they are targeted to lower income levels or special needs populations. The same should be explored while developing plans for implementing an affordable housing overlay, as well as using city-owned land for affordable housing by incentivizing projects which include deeper levels of affordability or units set aside for special needs populations. The city should also explore prioritizing the city's affordable housing funds and land dedicated to affordable housing under the Inclusionary Housing Ordinance to projects which include more units at deeper levels of affordability or targeted to special needs populations by awarding additional points in the scoring and competitive proposals. Another policy that should be explored to incentivize inclusion of people with developmental and other disabilities is lowering parking requirements for projects which include units targeted to these populations, as they are typically transit dependent. Thank you for this opportunity to comment on the draft policies and programs. We look forward to continuing to support the city in creating housing that is truly inclusive of people of all abilities.
Thank you. Can I ask, you listed a list of recommendations there. I assume those have been submitted to the city already for consideration?
Yes, we did submit our comments to the staff and consultant.
Okay. And I assume you've reviewed the documents produced by the city. Is there a particular item, if you're prioritizing, if it's possible to prioritize, is there one or two things that particularly stand out as things that you would like the city to look at in particular?
Yeah, for us, the priority is really the deeper levels of affordability. The population that we work with, they typically have very low incomes. A lot of them are fixed incomes, similar to seniors. And then the second would be the on-site supportive services, which we do provide, and they are funded by the regional center.
I'm sorry, could you say that again, please? I didn't catch it.
Sorry, so the on-site supportive services, so when there's units set aside in a typical affordable housing project, having those on-site supportive services, which are funded by the regional center.
Thank you. Thank you. Go to the next one.
I don't see any more hands raised. Is there anybody online that would still like to speak? It looks like we're good.
Okay, thank you. I think we're good to go to the next item.
Okay, well, we're at the point where we're looking for your feedback, and our staff thoughts had been that these were more of the substantive areas that you could provide feedback on, but of course we are open to commission feedback on any and all policies and programs that you've been provided. But if it helps the chair and the commission, if you wanted to start on these, we can go through them, staffs. How we'd like to do it, if you'd like to go around, we can go to the slides and take your feedback, but our thought was on these 5 topics. Perhaps you could start.
Yeah, that sounds good. So who would like to, what I propose is we go one by one, and then we'd have a group discussion after everybody's had a chance to express their opinion on these items. So who would like to go first? Speechless. Do we? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that struck me is about whether or not we've identified all the sites that would make sense for the overlay zone. For instance, just as examples, things that popped out at me when I just looked at it real quickly, the map is, the home church site, for example, is on our list of sites. And I would think that would be a likely candidate for affordable housing, right? It's on a church site. So, and possibly there's really nothing much on the west side. I mean, we've got the San Tomas Plaza, which is a bigger site now, and maybe that should be taken into consideration. And then, you know, the question of, I don't know what the right answer is, but it struck me that, you know, in the overlay zone, we're trying to encourage not going over the 75-foot limit by providing incentives. And some of the overlay sites, to me, seem like areas where we'd probably live with a taller area, a taller thing, like the prune yard, for example. Prune yard has tall towers. Another tall tower or two is probably not going to be as bad as a tall tower on Hamilton or Winchester that's near a residential neighborhood. So again, I'm not sure my thinking is exactly correct on this, but it would seem to me that maybe taking a little bit harder look at the overlay zone choices and seeing if, I mean, the other thing would be like, for instance, we've got the one of these is the technical center, you know, on McGlincy, off of McGlincy, right? So that is certainly more likely to, do we really need more of an incentive there to, I mean, we need an incentive to maybe do affordable housing, but whether or not the restriction on the height is essential there, because that's really in an area where height is, you know, probably more acceptable because of the location. So those are just some thoughts I had on that. And then the other question is, if the areas where we don't pick an overlay zone, are we susceptible, you know, the gray areas are places where, you know, we're probably not going to be as happy about them taking density bonuses and going too high if it's going to be, you know, near residential areas where we're less likely wanting things to get out of control. So the question I have is, for one example, because I live, it's not very far from here. It's the Hamilton location between 3rd and 1st, where all the small office buildings are that would make an excellent area for high density housing. Do we want to incentivize people to put in affordable housing there so it doesn't get out of control, right? I mean, it's an excellent area, yet it's in an area where, although it backs up to the fourplexes, if it was really high towers, there would be a concern, I think, by some of the residents. So there's a number of areas that aren't in the overlay zone that maybe we want to protect a little bit more by providing incentives. That's just my thoughts on that.
Okay, so if I was summarising that, you're saying, could we look at adding sites to the affordable, the AHOS, and are there areas where exceeding 75 foot would be suitable, and where it wouldn't be suitable?
Well, it wouldn't be necessary. Yes, I guess, unless there's something I don't understand. So.
Thank you.
Let's try the one sense, and just to step back, I think one of the broad objectives of these is to try and create a market for affordable housing development. So instead of market rate developers, but the rules and regulations favor affordable housing development. That's one objective. 2 is to indicate to affordable housing developers, we want you to come into our city. It sort of lays out a favorable suite of advantages, and it directs you to these sites. And then 3 is to provide areas where we'd like you to do this in exchange for this. The one area on the height, I do know, and I'll ask the attorney to weigh in if I skip a step here, that the 75-foot height limit is a voter-initiated approval. And to my understanding, Campbell would have to go back to the voters in order to overturn that. So that's that's the origin of that. And I just know at the council level, we've just heard general sensitivity from the council members of not wanting council to go forward, the administration to go forward with not respecting a voter approved height cap.
May I ask a question to that point? But the state statute would allow it even to override the voter decision?
That's true.
And if I may just quickly jump in here, I mean, the other thing that the affordable housing overlay zone is doing is it's creating a two-track process. So you'd still be availed the opportunity of going the density bonus route. So if a developer chose not to follow the city's affordable housing overlay zone requirements and wanted to have a building taller than 75 feet, say in the prune yard, they could potentially do so by just pursuing a SB 35, state density bonus project, which allows for increases in height above and beyond what the city otherwise caps you out at 75 feet. This is a secondary track, and as our director is offering, it's meant to help us create like a secondary market, right? So people who want to play by our rules, we provide a little bit greater clarity in terms of permit process and standards. We very clearly upfront indicate exactly what you'll be getting, but in exchange, we get something as well. And that could be in the form of addressing a certain special needs population or certain local priorities like the 75-foot height limit, which is voter approved.
Well, in general, I understand that. I think it's on the right path. I wonder if some of the carrots or the incentives should just get a second pass, or obviously council should look at them, but maybe there's that. You're not going to run a nexus study on the incentives, are you? Just on, okay, so I would recommend another pass on the incentives, because I think one of them, I don't think it's up right now on screen, but one of them was like adding 4 extra units, and maybe there's an incentive there, but I don't know that that's that much more financially exciting to a developer. So maybe it is 4 units, 20% on each unit, but I don't know that that moves the needle too much. So maybe just a second pass on the incentives. I think they're going the right direction though. So I'm in support of what was presented, and I do get that second track, Planner Rose. I think it starts to say follow these slightly better incentives, but don't go over 75 and focus on these high priority areas. For the AHAs, I think those are my comments, and I support it.
Commissioner Ostrowski.
Yeah, so I wanted to maybe make a step back and make a higher level comment. So first, we're talking a lot about numbers and the number of units for affordable housing, and I think we're really going in the right direction with that. I think that's really important, but I also think that we should consider the, in terms of incentives, the kind of the community building element of what the people there, the families there are going to experience. And I'd like to see something along the lines of incentives for how people are going to interact together, where they're going to interact, where they're going to congregate, where they're going to, like how and where they're going to enjoy living in this high density community, so that we can increase the quality of life for those people, so that the kids can play together, so that the neighbors can get to know each other, so that the entire community is safer because of all of that interaction and connection that they're building together. I think we're talking a lot about units and numbers, which is important. But if I were to make a trade-off between a few more units, I would prefer to go down the route of building a place for people to be together, whatever that means. So I recommend looking.
Place of community.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. It helps. I'll just offer, we're starting on some other tracks to address that. Mark your calendars, May 31st, we have the Cal Poly students have some great ideas on community stationary plans around the downtown and the Winchester light rail. And then further on the work plan, especially around the Hamilton area, the Fry site, and over around there, you'll remember there's a recommendation for a specific plan, but upcoming our work plan would be to come in and do some design work around how that area should look with respect to urban design and improvements. So those are also on the work plans.
Could you repeat that last part? Someone's coming to a study session or they're.
So, sure, two things. Mark your calendars. It was going to be my director's report. May 31st, our Cal Poly students, I think I mentioned before, are going to do those presentations with vision plans around Winchester and the downtown. I'll just say some initial products, a fountain of ideas coming out of those students, and you'll see those. And those are just ideas at this point. The question is, Campbell can pick those up and run with those on creating specific stationary plans. And then separately, if you remember in the general plan update, there's this proposal for the Hamilton area specific plan. And it encompasses the Fry's site, the Elephant Bar site, the Staples site, and some area sites in and around the Hamilton Light Rail and Highway 17. And I think our idea is to come in some really good urban design standards, gateway standards to that site, and a list of improvements that will be tied to development in that area. So just three areas that speak to creating community and neighborhoods that come in with the housing sites.
And if I may, real quickly, in response to Commissioner Strowski's comment, we are also separately working on the objective standards update. As part of that, we're going to be looking at providing standards, which could include on-site amenities and gathering places for housing development projects, not just within our AHAs, but citywide. So stay tuned on for that as well. That said, within the AHAs, you could create a suite of options to provide a suite of additional incentives for providing an even better space above and beyond that, which we might be considering as part of our objective standards update.
I think that sounds great, Stephen. I think it would really take what we're doing into the future and think differently about how people are living and how we're all using space.
Yeah, I would jump out of line with the commissioners, but build on this comment. I just like to build on this. I think this is a great, having a community is a really great idea, and I'd really encourage the city to incentivize and build on what Commissioner Ostrowski say. I would add, and I think this was by Callistra Webster, on-site support services for disabilities and developmental disabilities, and facilities around that, and encouraging space for that service as well, for that part of the population. So it's similar type of thing. So sorry, Commissioner Cray.
Yeah, I'm going to trying to stay here on the AHOZ, and I think I have a question for you here, Stephen, but I'm just trying to. So I guess I go back to the practical matter of, trying to do a plan that actually results in BMR units. The devil's in the details. Well, it's so hard to do. But with that, so with that example that you showed, Stephen, and I don't have it in front of me, and I'm going by my memory, there was something like with the AHOZ, you get 116 units. With the state, you get 112. So you only get 4 more units. On the other hand, the developer gets a ministerial review, which saves some money. They get a fee reduction or waivers for the impact fees, which I know we don't have a lot, but that's something. And they get the city funding frontage improvements, which I don't exactly know what that means, but that's something. So I guess I'm wondering then if these incentives are enough to actually result in a project that would be bigger, but also would have a much bigger percentage of BMR. If I read it correctly, our AHOZ would have to be 50% BMR, or if not higher. Did I read it right? I mean, is that in a nutshell?
Yeah.
Example we had.
You did. Now, I'll candidly offer this is not intended to be this isn't our staff's intention to stand up a functional program. It was just to highlight areas where we could make adjustments within a locally adopted AHAs. I would say what we drafted here was just saying if you were to provide, say, a 5% density bonus above and beyond whatever you would otherwise get by state density bonus law, right? In this particular scenario, it was only a handful of units. We could look at adjusting that. I'd probably say if you were looking at the way that this is drafted right now, what would maybe be the most attractive to developer, or say the qualification of the affordability range was 30% moderate as opposed to 15% very low. That might be advantageous from a financial standpoint to a developer to pursue that. We didn't actually go so far as stipulating these percentages because this is meant to just be for illustrative purposes only, not really intended to be a stand-up program per se just yet.
Okay, no, I forgot about that. That's another big concern. But anyway, I agree with, Commissioner Ostrowski, Commissioner Zisser made some good points. If this is something that's really going to work, it's really going to make these units happen. We want, good units that people like, of course, and we might want to expand it to a couple other areas. It seems like it's kind of a win-win if it actually works, when the devil's in the details and developers actually like it.
And if I may, just one more point I'd like to make, just for the benefit of all the commission, is that what we're considering tonight is just advancing a policy to consider to create an AHAS, not the actual standards themselves. So it's not our intent to get specific line by line feedback on these standards, although we would definitely appreciate that feedback because it'll help us when we do return with one. But the intention would be, we're not creating one tonight. We would have to come back with a staff report presentation with the Planning Commission and Council to create an AHAS at a later date and time, which would be much more thoroughly vetted.
Okay, gotcha, Stephen. Thank you.
It helps the commission. I just probably should have done this earlier. So it's almost a set of values that drives this. I was sketching them out. So the first question is, what do we want? And I think it's affordable housing, and you could say 50%, 100%. The second might be, what are we willing to offer? And that's a bucket, and that sort of parking reductions or ministerial review. The third would be, what don't we want? And I think what you heard from council is not to want an abridgment of the 75-foot height. And then finally, to all your points, where do we want it? So constructively pulling this apart as you create these are sort of like the value statements that drive how we package this program.
Thank you, Chair. So two questions come to mind. What if a larger property owner wants this overlay zoning? Can they just ask for it and will they get it? And then the reverse of the question, what if there is a property that you're applying this to or suggesting this be applied to and they don't want it? How does that process work?
I can jump in there. I'll tackle the second one first. So this is an option. It's a secondary path. It's a track that a developer may choose to go down, but there's no obligation, even if you're within a local AHAS, the Affordable Housing Overlay Zone, that you would need to abide by it. You may certainly follow either city standard requirements or state density bonus law requirements in development of your project. Now, for a developer who would like to be in it, which is not in the zone, it wouldn't meet the very first test of the eligibility requirement. So our intention was to implement the AHAS by mapping the locations where we thought it would be best supported, kind of getting back at those principles that we were talking about a moment ago. We're trying to identify where we'd like this AHAS to apply so that we're identifying where in our community we think it makes the most sense. And that the only way that a developer, if they wanted to say opt in, would be amending the general plan or the housing element to change the boundaries of the AHAS itself, which would be a significant undertaking on a project by project basis.
Thank you.
So I'm just going to go in the order in which I have my notes, which are mostly notes with a couple of questions. So I very much approve of the idea of establishing navigation centers and making them by right, given that that's a use that generally gets a lot of localized opposition. Everybody wants navigation centers in their city. Nobody wants them next door. But I note the navigation centers only work if there's somewhere to exit to. Is there any idea of making permanent supportive housing by right in the similar way? Or is this sort of covered under the affordable housing overlay zone? That would be the by right permanent supportive housing that the navigation centers would funnel people to.
That was a question. I think the answer, you asked about two different programs. One is, could it be an incentive in the affordable housing overlay zone? It could. We're subject to your feedback, and that's an incentive point we could put in. I think separately what you saw on the tables, and I don't have the policy reference, perhaps Brittany or Stephen does, or Jeff, is on one of the programs is actually to adopt a zoning ordinance amendment that allows navigation centers by right in certain zones.
Right, that's what I'm referring to.
Okay. Yeah, I think those are two separate actions that we were pursuing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just saying that they relate, and if we do one but not the other, we'll wind up in a situation where people get into navigation centers and then have nowhere to go. And I want to make sure that we don't do that. So I was actually unaware that group housing and SROs were conditionally allowed uses. The fact that we have very little in the way of that probably indicates that this is the sort of thing that is discouraged by conditional use permit. Is establishing group housing and SROs as allowed uses part of the overlay zone proposal? Can it be?
Yeah, again, our answer today, it's not on the table, but pending council and commission feedback, it could be.
On the same track, my reaction to seeing the draft overlay zone was that it was very small. I think I may have the wrong expectation. I agree with Commissioner Zisser. The density bonus doesn't pick and choose. Like, you can use density bonus, anywhere in the city. So it seems like we're predicting, like we're really trying to predict this parcel will be developable, this parcel won't be developable over the next 8 years, because as you say, this is a general plan type thing. And so if we get it wrong, somebody has to come to us, ask for a general plan amendment. And I think that would really discourage this. I think that we should have a very permissive overlay zone. Like, I'm imagining sort of everything that's relatively close to transit, because we don't know how those land uses are going to change over the next 8 years. I don't quite understand the concern about being too generous. I don't see it as a problem if people produce too much affordable housing. So this may be too in the weeds. I recognize, Stephen, that the table we were shown is just an example, but I note that pretty much most of our opportunity sites are within a half mile of a transit station. If you do 100% affordable there, you don't get 50% density bonus, you get 80% density bonus. So like, the program is pretty big. And also I think you get 4 concessions instead of 3. So my concern is that developers aren't going to want to use this program. I really like Commissioner Ostrowski's idea of, having some kind of like design element to make it like really extra livable, very nice. And I hope that we can do something like that without discouraging production by making it difficult to comply with, that we can provide that in some relatively easy to comply with and objectively stated way. I have a thought about inclusionary costs. It might be worthwhile to, so we currently levy them, I believe, starting at 10 units, and we're thinking about levying them at a lower rate on fewer units. And it might make sense to encourage missing middle by levying them on single family homes that don't come with an ADU, but not on ones that do, or 2 to 9 unit developments. That would be a pretty straightforward way to incentivize small scale missing middle naturally affordable type development. And additionally, like, I've been looking at the building reports every month, and most of what we've been building over the last year at least has been ADUs, legalizing existing ADUs, and single family detached homes. I'm still negative on the idea of using linkage fees, given what it showed. Like, that's just does not seem like enough production to be worth discouraging commercial use in Campbell. I totally understand that affordable housing developers would like the extra income. It's not, how can I say this? It's not incident on them, but this seems to be kind of missing the point. Like, we're just not going to be able to subsidize our way entirely all the way to affordability. I don't think that particular thing is worth it.
Sorry, Vice Chair, could you expand on that point? I don't quite understand it.
Which part?
The part about the linkage fees?
Oh, the linkage fee is expected based on that slide to get us 10 to 20 units over the next 8 years. And a linkage fee would discourage commercial development. And given the concern about that, because like the cost of commercial real estate is also really high, not just residential real estate. I don't think risking, I realize it would have to go through a nexus study and everything, but I don't really think it's worth the risk there for such a small return.
So you're against the linkage fee?
Yes. And I'm just going to touch on this. We're talking about doing an SB 10 ordinance, which I'm very excited about seeing, and I hope that the stuff I put forward will, that Commissioner Kamkar and I will be working on, will inform that in some ways. Just as a note, one of the conclusions there was that looking at the classical forms of missing middle housing described on missingmiddlehousing.org, I went over our current zoning code and saw whether or not they were legal. Every single one of them is not allowed because of parking. Like other things, some of them have problems with minimum lot size or FAR, but every one of them is illegal because of parking. So on the parking standards, I really appreciate the notes on parking standards. I think that's a really good change. I would also consider reductions in commercial parking requirements, especially in mixed-use developments, because the last two mixed-use developments we've had actually proposed, even with the reductions in residential parking requirements, they still required sort of the inside to be scooped out and replaced with a parking garage. And when we figure out what our numbers should be, I think we should have some kind of concrete basis for them. The current numbers apparently were decided by a rubric of it has to be burdensome so that they'll have to negotiate with us, which is, we should find some way of making that, base them on something concrete. And I think we should consider parking replacement for like replacing some parking spaces with bike parking or car share parking with some multiples, say, 5 parking stalls to 1 car share stall. I think the ratio in, it was either Denver or Austin, was something like 20-1, which I haven't really looked into that, but I think that's a really good way to save space and make these things a lot more constructible. And lastly, I would encourage us to set a goal of some proportion of our housing being approved by right, or through a ministerial process as opposed to a discretionary one. If we want to make things less discretionary, we should set an actual goal there. If we don't feel comfortable setting it at 85%, maybe set it to 50%. Just put that on the board somewhere. Those are my notes.
Thank you. Do we have some more comments?
One more comment. So something that was just said triggered another thought, which was it was along the lines of the parking requirements. And as a parent, the kind of the need for having a car comes a lot from the fact that you have to, in general, take your kids to daycare if you want to be working. And if it wasn't for that element, it would be a lot easier for many parents to take public transportation to work. So along the lines of, creating high density affordable housing, I wanted to add to my previous comment that, and kind of a space for a potential on-site daycare business that could be then used as like a clubhouse or a community gathering area during the evenings and weekends would definitely kind of serve, it would get maximum usage for that space, and if we could trade providing something like that for an incentive, I would be willing to provide a taller structure allowance, because I think that would be well worth the community benefit compared to, the downside of the city having a couple more stories as the trade-off there. And I think that if we think about that holistically, it will create a better quality of life when we think about combining it with the reduced parking standards, and we think about the way that people kind of live in general and what we're trying to ask them to do, which is, consume less energy, don't drive, don't have parking, But we have to figure out, why are people needing their cars, and how do we accommodate that and reduce that need in terms of kind of the day-to-day routine that people have with families.
I really agree with that. That's a really great idea, especially because just the concept of mixing uses, so you don't have to drive from one end of town to the other to do something. Like that's a really good example of that. And for the if we want to have sort of I guess a family style affordable housing overlay zone type, we could have something with a on-site playground, on-site daycare, that sort of thing. Maybe ground floor doctor's office or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's great comments. I think it's reimagining transport in some respects, because we're just thinking about cutting down parking and then say, well, people still park and it goes on the side roads. It's actually addressing, I think Commissioner Ostrowski was talking about this, is getting what is transport for? What do people need to do with transport? Because if you want to use your bike, I'm not talking about electric bikes, just bikes in Campbell, it isn't a bike city, a bike friendly city, because trying to find a place to just put your bike, securely lock your bike is a nightmare. And then if we want to encourage people to, there's an electric scooter behind me, right? That's quite valuable. And where do you charge it? So it's taking a more reimagining the transport aspect of, if we're doing high density, is this having dedicated spaces for Uber and Lyft? So when people don't want to use, they have to use a car, right?
Or car share parking.
Car share parking, or small minibuses.
Your Avis might have 3 parking spots at every one of these locations, right? Or whatever the.
Yeah, because, the people will still need access to cars. Now, how can we make it easier for them to do that without using their own cars necessarily? And when they're traveling locally and they want to use or how can we make it easier for them to access alternatives to cars, right? So is that renting electric bikes, scooters, or whatever? But I think it needs to be built into the way we design our buildings rather than trying to retrofit it afterwards. I think that's a much tougher thing to do.
I think the childcare is a key point. Thank you for sharing that, Commissioner Ostrowski. Just to light devil's advocate, at school age, then they do need transportation to a school, so you don't solve necessarily that for life, but for small children, yes. But I also wonder what I'm posing a question here. How would you propose within any of these frameworks that we incentivize that? Because the cost of real estate, is it like dedicated to childcare? Like it can only be childcare, or it's a retail space that could potentially be childcare?
Well, I kind of envision it as like, it would be a business. So.
Right. So it's likely a sole proprietor or, whatever kind of business it is, but they lease the space and they have to hire qualified educators or childcare support. But I'm seeing, and maybe it'll change in 5 years, but I'm seeing like extremely tight labor markets. So they have to raise the price of salaries. So then, the real estate lease, it like almost becomes like it's hard to operate one of those. So the incentives would have to be very attractive to encourage you building a tower, 8-story building with ground floor childcare. What is the incentive? It would have to be
I guess what
very
I'm saying
firm
is
incentive.
I'm not saying that the developer should be operating the daycare. I'm saying that the developer in the facility that they're building has to have a space, which is a room, next to a playground, which, and then depending on the age of the kids that they want to set up for, there are certain ratios and requirements. I think that's pretty straightforward to look into. And then a business, a child daycare, operator can go in there and just in the same way that in some cases daycare operators have kids that come into their homes, you know, they might take care of like 4 kids. This is a little bit, I mean, this is bigger than that, but not to the scale of some of the larger corporations that are providing on-site daycare, where they're also not operating it. You know, Google's not operating their daycare, they're providing the space, and then there's a business that's operating that daycare and making sure they're complying with state standards and regulations. And so the incentive for the developer would be, you know, providing them, if they can provide this space on the area that makes sense, maybe they can build another story of, you know, X number of units to make that feasible.
I guess and I'll stop after this comment. I just figured the developer wouldn't necessarily want to do that unless he could guarantee some kind of lease agreement, or he was not forced, but incentivized, and adding that extra floor could be that incentive. But then if no one goes there, it's just an empty room. Or is could it be an ice cream shop if it's not a daycare?
Well, I think those would be good questions for the staff to investigate.
You know, fair.
Yeah.
Where I'm going with all this is that it's important and it should be thought through, because unless you build incentives or a process, then it won't happen.
Yeah.
Or
I mean,
it'll just be an empty room
I'm
forever.
kind of laying out the need that I see in the community. I'm not suggesting or proposing a solution.
No, thank you. I just wanted to dig in a little bit because it is important.
Yeah.
Thanks.
But a daycare with an ice cream store next door, now, who wouldn't love that?
And that was hypothetical for the record. But yes.
And I would, I think this is a great opportunity to see if, like, we cannot be the first planning commission that has had this thought. And I would wonder if other cities have set up particular affordable housing forms that have integrated daycare and things like that, and how it worked out for them. If staff could investigate that, I think that would be very, very helpful.
If it's helpful, the density bonus law that the state has written has a childcare facility written into it that includes, so there's a basis for, you know, the city to look at state law.
Oh, that's really helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
I just want to come back to a point about incentivizing people, for developers to build these affordable housing, and picking up a point on Commissioner Zissou. I know the council does not like this, but I think the 75 feet, it sounds like it may be out of the city's hands anyway. If somebody wanted to put a 75-foot development in for high density below market rate, I'm just trying to clarify this, does the state law override what the city and the council can do?
The state density bonus law is always there as an alternative for any eligible property. It's any residential project with 5 or more units. So it's a very low bar to be able to pull that lever and use the state density bonus law. And so really what's at hand here is developing a local alternative to that. The state density bonus law is voluntary for the applicant, developer, fully 100% voluntary. No one can make them use it, not the city, not the state. But on the same vein, if the city has a City of Campbell overlay housing affordability tool, the developer can similarly voluntarily use that. So it's just setting up a possible alternative to the state density bonus laws that would be more attractive to the developer based on what's in it.
But just, you know, one of the things I keep forgetting though is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that going over the 75, going the extra, whatever, 33 feet, it really is based on it being 100% affordable, right? I mean, it's got to be 100% affordable. You get it's the SB 35. So there isn't, correct me if I'm wrong, to go over 75, go over our general plan 75 feet in a non-100% affordable situation is not likely, right? There is no trigger for that, right?
Actually, the state density bonus law,
Okay, so that's a state density bonus.
will allow you to go over the height, and it's based on how affordable your project is. And it's pretty easy, because the waivers, the unlimited waivers that are part of that program. So if you just meet the basic qualification, which is pretty low if you're doing especially the very low affordable units, then anything that physically precludes you from building the approved density on the site, and typically the first place where your developer will use a waiver and you get unlimited waivers is for the height.
Okay, and so that would be a market rate developer coming in and building and only getting 15%, giving 15% the below market rate. They could use a density bonus to go higher.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You put the however they select to use the density bonus law, as soon as they meet the affordable requirement, then the density bonus is additional market rates on top of those affordable units.
Okay.
And if I can,
and the percentage is based on the formula that's in the density bonus law. And it's all in charts, so you can look at it. It's government code section, 65915, and it's 65915F is where the charts are that you'd want to look at.
All right, so that's even more reason for us to look real hard at this incentives that we're trying to do in the zone, right? I mean, to try to mitigate those kinds of things, right? So, and I just had a comment on I know I'm a little bit of an outlier here with regards to, bicycle use and parking and car use. I'm a pragmatic person, and one of the things with regards to I'm in favor of reducing parking requirements to some extent. I don't know, the zero parking stuff is a little bit uncomfortable for me. One of the things that strikes me in terms of, affordable housing here, if you look at the numbers, we're working off of the median income, and affordable housing in the moderate and even low income is still a fair amount of income. It can be somebody making 60 or 80 or even $100,000 a year, okay, in a household. So those are people who can afford cars. And in our lousy mass transit world here, which isn't going to get any better. I mean, that's where I look, is we just have a terrible mass transit situation here. We have a light rail that doesn't get you where you want to be. People don't, we have a behavioral issue with people don't use buses except for people who absolutely have no choice, whether they're students or low income people. So that's not going to get better in the near term, no matter how many bicycle racks you put in. And I know people disagree with me on this. I don't see people biking to work, okay? Maybe I'm not up early enough. But I go out to the trail a lot, and there's nobody biking down the trail to work with their briefcase. Okay, so we just there you go. Well, I show my age. So backpacks. So I just look at it pragmatically, is that when we're going to put up high density housing, there's going to be a need for some parking. I'm sorry, people that, whether it's a single guy living in a studio utility that's working at a job making $70,000 or $80,000 a year, that person's going to have a car probably. Okay.
So your point is
my point is that we like to talk about reducing the car use. The reality is, we put up a lot of these things, we're going to have, and we don't provide some reasonable level of parking, we're going to have a an unintended consequence about, people parking in neighborhoods and all kinds of things that are going to be, I may not even be here, but it won't be looking good.
Just to help you with your optimism for the future, in my opinion, mass transport is pretty inefficient, but I think that it's not the mass transportation that's going to get better. It's going to be all the automation in car technology that's going to basically, it's going to be like your little mobile taxi that's going to come and you're not going to need your car. It'll just come and take you where you want to go. And then it'll just be like Uber. It'll take the next person to where they want to go without the driver at an affordable price.
If I could just throw in.
Yeah, I was going to say,
I promise this is relevant.
Okay. Let's keep it.
So 2 things. One, I either bike, walk to the bus, or take transit to work. I work up in Sunnyvale with the backpack I brought here. And second, I think we're responsible for the light rail issue. Like if you said the light rail doesn't take you where you want to go, it's because our light rail stations are surrounded by parking or 1-story buildings. And like we are in the process of fixing that. I'm pretty proud of ourselves for that. Pretty proud of us for that. It'll make the light rail actually more useful.
Right. Okay. Thank you. It's my fault too. Letting it drift a bit. Commissioner Craig.
Yeah, just real quick on 2 topics that just came up. But very quick on the childcare, just FYI, you guys probably all, but the Measure A bonds that we all approved, it was almost $1 billion not too many years ago. The beauty of that county program is the supportive services as part of the low-income housing. And I think every one of those projects is childcare. And I'm pretty sure, and there's not that there's that many, but there's half a dozen, a few more comments. So that was from day one, that was a stipulation, which is very good. But in terms of the parking, of course, I'm sure we could all talk here for, until, a week from Sunday. And Commissioner Zisser's points, but just to get to what we're talking about here, I think the staff in the state is doing the right thing on lowering the parking. I think we've heard from the developers, for-profit and nonprofit, that the reducing the parking requirements is a huge incentive, probably the number 2 after density itself. So we've got to do that. And we all know that climate change is probably the biggest issue of our life, right? So we know that when there's less parking, there is less driving and there are fewer cars. But we also know what we're going to find out, and I think that's what we're all kind of worried and scared about. We also know that there's going to be, too many cars and too few parking spaces in some of these locations, some of these projects, and eventually will shake out. I think light rail will become a better alternative for more people. I think more people will bike. I think we're working hard on the bike lanes, and I do know people who have biked to work. To work for many years. So I do think
reduced parking.
I think our parking ideas that we have in our staff report are really on the money, and I think it's a tough issue, and the devil's in the details on that one for sure. But I think we got to push the envelope a little bit on the parking, and I think it's happening everywhere, and it'll happen here, and we'll see what happens. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. And before.
I promise it's not about parking.
No, just pause for a second. See where we are on track or off track. And you may or may not be getting the information that you're looking for, Director Eastwood.
Didn't want to get in the way of a robust commission conversation, but of course the purpose tonight is to give constructive feedback on the policies and programs proposed to you. So if I summarize what we heard, I think we've heard robust feedback on the AHAs. You had earlier questions on the average unit size FAR. The commission can come back to that if anybody has additional thoughts. You've had sort of a round discussion on parking. If it helps, we can put back on the screen staff's proposal. We articulated to you, but if there are specific ideas on, again, we don't have a golden standard we picked. It's more of a direction that we should go on this, both citywide and within certain areas. So I'd say number 1, any additional thoughts on those three items? Yes, no, and then two, probably come back and as a separate point, if you have feedback on any of the formerly further fair housing. A lot of that stuff is a bit more nebulous. It's a lot of outreach and targeting certain groups, but we're more than happy to support more discussion on that and then thoughts on outreach. But I just say last chance or any additional thoughts on the first three items, AHOZ, average unit size and parking, and then we can move on and close up the rest.
Okay, if I may, so on item number 2, since it's brought up, I've mentioned this before. How can we count number of bedrooms instead of number of units? Because people live in bedrooms. If you want to house people, a unit that has more bedrooms should get higher credit than a unit that has less bedrooms. So, and per bedroom, so we should calculate per bedroom cost, not per unit cost. If 4-bedroom units that can house, you know, 4, maybe 6 people, the cost per person is lower than probably an SRO or a, you know, so I want us to be cognitive of that and not be against the 4-bedroom just because it's bigger. Well, it houses more people, you know, so I want to say that. And about parking, I can see both sides, you know. We don't want too much parking, you know, and developers don't want too much parking, but at the same time, zero parking is going too far as well. So, you know, so I think a minimum number of parking we should be advocating.
Could we put up the staff recommendations for parking, make this look less subjective, more to the point?
So the proposal we have on the screen is more of a programmatic approach to how we would look at our parking. And the feedback we're looking for is, does it make sense to have this programmatic approach? And of course, if you have specific thoughts on standards that we should look at in guiding this, we'd be open to that too.
So I'll, while everybody else is reading it, I went through this, so I'll just comment real quickly. First 4 things I'm okay with. Remove guest parking, I'm not exactly sure about that in terms of, you know, with larger complexes, it seems to me that you need to have some guest parking. But I don't know about zero guest parking. And as far as, I'm not sure I understand what allowing parking to be unbundled from residential units means. So maybe you could explain that.
That's a newer planning real estate concept where instead of renting a living unit for $1,000 a month that includes 2 parking spaces, either in a garage or in the parking lot, it's just assume that everyone who lives there has a car, they get 1 or 2 parking spaces. Unbundled means you have a choice. You're presented with a choice as a consumer. Do I want to pay $1,000 for the apartment and then another $200 a month for the parking? You can choose, and the developer could charge it because that's the way this is structured as an allowance, not a requirement. But currently, the code doesn't allow unbundled parking because the municipal code reads that these developments shall require X number of parking spaces per unit, and they shall be available to the residents of the unit to park their vehicles, and as well as the guest parking. So it's really moving to more of a, you know, Manhattan. No, this might be a unfavorable analogy, but in more dense urban centers where land value is just so incredibly expensive, if you're paying a lot of money for an apartment and there's an empty parking space downstairs that you're not using because you have mass transit and you can walk, you feel like you're getting ripped off. Like, why am I paying for this parking space I'm not using? So by unbundling it, it kind of just responds to the market better.
Thank you. Well, I think that's an excellent idea. I'd be in favour of reducing 0.3, is it, to 1 parking space per unit, and then people have the option to then the saving space, you could have 50% reduction, and then make that so people can buy it or rent it or whatever. So to the unbundling bit, I think the unbundling is great. You could have one per unit and then unbundle everything else and cut the total down. That'd be my input. I don't know how that reflects to.
It gives you more options.
Yeah.
In terms of this usage of the space. That's a good thing.
Yeah, I will just, for context, I think the cost of land here is something like $3 million an acre, which, like, we don't look like Manhattan, but we cost like Manhattan. Hence unbundling, great idea. Is it okay for me to pop onto a different subject?
Yeah, I just wanted to, the only thing I offer is, it was seen in the notes, a lot of the market rate developers had very similar feedback. So just echoing that back to you on having a minimum 1 unit per space and then unbundling the rest at a certain ratio.
Yeah.
That's everything on parking. You're more than able to move on to the next item if you'd like.
I could go on about parking for a long time, but I'm not going to because I have consideration for my fellow commissioners. Thank you. The person here from Audubon mentioned dark skies, and that I definitely see the point in the appeal. That feels like something that would have gone into the EIR process. Did we miss the boat on that? Is this something we can fit somewhere into our plan for the next 8 years? Because this seems like an important environmental issue that, especially if we can just, include by reference a standard way of not,
I think it's environmental and human because a lot of our streetlights were changed from incandescent to LED, and I don't know, like, measurement wise, how much brighter it actually is, but when your bedroom faces one, it's quite a bit brighter.
Oh, they're very blue, like compared to the sodium lamps.
Yeah, so it's really unfortunate, and so I really do sympathize with what the Audubon woman said and the animals, because it's not comfortable for.
Can I add, she raises great points, and we should probably have her research sent around the commission just so we can read it for the article she's referencing. But it's not just animals, it's humans. So children to adults, any human is affected by light. And I don't have the scientific backing right here to speak to, but it really does change the health of human and animals. So it's important to consider that the design standards would include some kind of limitation or restriction or specific not cool temperature, but temperature of the light to prevent the cool temperature. Or I think California's building code has requirements that all lighting has to be down, but we could definitely reference other standards that are within that, that comment. So I think Audubon is important from the speaker, but I think it's bigger than just animals. It's all living creatures.
Agreed. And just a pedantic note, because I get confused about this sometimes, when we think of as warm colors correspond to a lower color temperature, because why not? Yeah, this seems to tie in with some of the things that came up in the environmental review, things like noise or air pollution. This seems kind of relevant to that. I don't know how we fit that into anything. I just wanted to make sure we raised that.
Right. She did recommend using motion activated.
I think we got the point across in terms of consideration rather than necessarily the details of how you look at the lighting. It's probably outside our remit. There was the rent control item. Is that going to be a?
Yeah, if there's any council feedback on that, staff saw this as a parity issue. It was just using existing state law standards for market rate development to apply to BMR units. Again, an issue had just come up recently in our BMR program where some units were potentially subject to a 30-40% increase in rent over a 1 month period, rent shock. And we had realized that the state standards that restrict the monthly increases did not apply to BMR units. So staff's proposal, again, just for parity, was to ensure that those standards that apply to market rate units also apply to below market rate units.
Okay. And with the staff's recommendation, which bodies did you talk to about that recommendation?
Yeah, to be fair, to date, not many. So to be fair, this issue came up within the last week. So you're the first body that we've shown that to.
Okay. My feedback would be I completely understand it, but I'm also concerned that it puts people off doing BMR developments. But that's just my feeling as opposed to being knowledgeable. So would encourage staff to reach out to the respective organisations, or probably on both sides of the argument.
As I understand it, we're talking about AB 1482 protections.
Correct.
If I understand correctly, those don't take effect until a building is at least, what, 15 years old?
I'll have to defer to others to confirm that.
I don't think it takes it. I don't think it counts on new or recent construction. So I guess you'd have to look into that. But I think it's and the control is not particularly. It's not below inflation, so rent will eventually catch up. It just protects people against rent shocks. I think it's like I'm in favor of extending AB 1482 protections to people in BMR housing.
I've just got to ask this one question because if it's BMR housing restricted to the, how can the rent go up 40%?
Yeah, good point. So it's BMR housing, so it's capped at a certain percentage. Of course, it's deed restricted. What had happened in this case is there was a deferred review of rent increases over a number of years, perhaps related to COVID by property management. And the property owner had come in and said, well, to catch up for 3 to 4 years of not addressing that, they were proposing to do a 40% increase. So again, to Commissioner Buckbinder's point, it's really to address that rent shock of 1 year. But to answer your question, Commissioner Cray, they are still capped at an overall rent that's at a BMR standard. It's just avoiding a rate increase over a 1 year period that still meets that standard.
Yeah, I just, that struck me too. And I was wondering, I had the same question about how it could be a 40% increase. You'd have to have not had an increase in 5 years, 4 or 5 years, based on even in the last 2 years, I looked it up that the median income has gone up 14%. So it's like, if they hadn't, raised rent in 2 years, then yeah, okay, there would be some increase, but not 40%. So, I mean, the whole point of affordable housing is to maintain it as affordable housing, right? And I would assume that they're restricted by the formula, unless a person has had a significant increase in their wages, that they're restricted to the 30% of income number, right? So, but the thing that we don't need to get into it. It's like one of the things that I thought about is it would be at some point, since we're big into affordable housing coming to Campbell in theory, that we should understand better the mechanism for overseeing it, the third party that does this. I don't know anything. I looked on their site. It's like their site is mostly about signing up to be, a candidate, right, to get on the list. So it'd be nice at some future date. I personally would love to understand that process and oversight better, how people qualify, over not only how they qualify, but how they stay, how the rents are increased over time, and the restrictions on people that are in affordable housing, and all that kind of thing would be more important, I think, for us to understand that in the future, since affordable housing in theory is going to be a bigger part of what we're looking at.
So we're saying we just don't have enough information on this to weigh in beyond what the state
I think so.
has said.
Well, I think it was also on this.
I support the rental limits per the state on affordable housing in terms of the numbers that they're limiting per year. So I would support that.
But that's the state's one. Are you? There's the one recommended by the staff. Are you supporting the staff one?
Yeah.
Okay.
The staff one is just talking about not increasing the rent for the first 12 months.
Yes, it's not the state one. This
Right.
is supplementing.
Right,
Yeah.
but we have to.
Right. So you're supporting that. Not
um,
you. Sorry.
I don't have an
I lost
opinion on this.
I lost your point.
Yeah.
The
Right.
state has a requirement.
Correct.
The 5%, whatever it is, yeah, plus. So I certainly support that in terms of us having an additional requirement.
No, the proposal would just be to use that standard with BMR units.
Yeah.
No more, no less.
Which we have to do. Because of state law. Right?
Well, the discovery we had is the state law doesn't apply to BMR units, it applies to market rate. So it'd just be using the state standard for below market rate units.
Support that.
So it's this supplement, and I think my point was, had we talked to other agencies, but I think we're going to. Okay, what other points have we got?
I'll just tee up I think we've gotten your feedback on parking, HOZ, any additional feedback on average unit size?
Outreach. Any ideas on outreach?
Sorry, average maximum unit size? Oxymoron, maximum average unit size?
Yeah.
And maybe we could put that slide up, Brittany, just real fast if there's any commission feedback on this. So the proposal was to either have an average maximum average unit size of 1,200 square feet for higher density projects, or as the developers had recommended, don't go that route if our concern is massing, to put in a floor area ratio maximum, and had heard some commission feedback on perhaps why not do both.
You know, I think that 1250 makes a lot of sense because, you know, that allows you to have, you know, an 800 and a 1600, you know, looking at an average of 1250. An 800 is like a small 2-bedroom and a 1600 is like a pretty good size 3-bedroom. So it kind of accounts for what we're trying to achieve, I think, which is to kind of avoid or deter 2,500 square foot place, which is a lot of space for not as many people, right?
Do we think the developers can actually develop that though? Wouldn't they make it as small as possible to squeeze in as many units as possible?
Well, I think that's what this is. So we're proposing that that's what we want them to do. I can't speculate exactly on what they
you know, on
would
surface, I think what you're saying makes sense. But I think if you consider other issues, for example, where's grandma, grandpa gonna live? You know, do they want them live in a place or live with you? How about teenage kids or adolescent kids that comes back? You know, so I don't think we should think of a 4-bedroom unit as a couple rooms are gonna stay empty. You know, and with a 4-bedroom house, you build 1 kitchen, 1 living room. With a 1 unit, you build 1 kitchen.
What was your proposal about room count? Could you reiterate that?
So what I'm saying is that a 4-bedroom unit could be as affordable as an SRO, as a studio, if you were to consider how many people it houses. And it accomplishes other things that would be of interest to Campbell, you know, taking care of the elderly, taking care of. My son was actually looking for a unit in LA for a 1-month rotation. This program, we were looking up $5,000 for a month. He needs to be there for 5 weeks. So he needs to find a friend that would go in with him for.
Could we keep to the point?
So thank you. The point is housing prices are becoming ridiculous, and it's not just for the homeless or for, you know, who can afford it.
Understood with the average and maximum unit size. 1250 is not a bad number. I'm fine with that number, but I'm wondering if which direction is it limiting the developer?
Well, constraint is a certain number of units per acre. So within that number of units, each one has to have, the average of each one has to be 1250.
So I guess this is a way of trying to keep the building from being too big, even though it's going to contain a large number of units.
The unit from being too big.
Well, right, but on average, that means the building will not be too big. So if you have X number of units times, X maximum units, maximum X average unit size, you're not going to have as big a building.
So does everybody understand the two questions? First of all, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand? Because it seems to be we don't understand what the two questions are.
I understand the FAR piece. I'm trying to wrap my head around which direction the 1250 is preventing or enabling.
It's preventing it from being larger. Both of these are ways, as I understand it, both of these are ways of keeping a building.
His head no.
Nope, I got this wrong. Oh, darn.
So could you clarify?
My
because
apologies.
there's some confusion,
Yeah,
and then I think
this-
we should take a vote on there just so we get some type of
This-
conclusion on this.
This slide is working against the concept, unfortunately. In my view, the size of the building is set by the height limit, the setbacks, the parking requirements, and most market rate developers are going to max out their building envelope and then fill it in with as many largest units possible. The affordable developers kind of take the opposite approach. They want to max out the total number of units in the most efficient way possible. And they may not fill up the whole envelope where they may. And so the FAR is a tool, absolutely, if you're concerned about just total building size. Historically, Campbell has dealt with that, with the non-FAR approach, with the setbacks, the heights, the units per acre. And so the average maximum unit size is really getting into, like, think of a project that's coming in at 75% of the maximum, right? Because that's a requirement. They're maxing out the building envelope, whether it's FAR based or the other way, Campbell does it. And it's all 4-bedroom luxury condos or town condos stacked up. And the planner's like, you could do another 12, 15 units in here if you made some of these units smaller. And the developer's like, well, that's nice of you to point out, but this is what I want to do. I get the biggest bang for my buck with this layout I have with lots of units, not the maximum, but enough units to fill out the whole volume and get as many high-priced units as possible. Because to your point, Commissioner Kamkar, all the development impact fees are based on per unit. So if you're paying a $20,000 or $30,000 park impact fee or traffic impact, we don't have traffic impact fees, so stick to a parking impact fee. As a developer, you're going to want to build as few units as possible if you're cost sensitive to that element. Sewer impact fees, all that stuff. So there's some built-in incentives to build fewer, bigger units. And so this policy would give the cities some leverage or more than leverage, I mean, it's just a hard requirement to make their units balance in a way of large and small, or all exactly 1250 that would meet this requirement. And so it allows for, on average, a more efficient use of land, more units, maybe slightly smaller, but maybe more variety as well, smaller and larger to Commissioner Ostrowski. Thank you. I'm out of practice. And I'll stop there.
Yeah, and just I think the other point is that building smaller units, it's less expensive for the developer per square foot and for their return to build a big unit, right? Because to make greater square footage, it's just floor, right? If you build a small unit, you still need a kitchen and you need a bathroom. And you build a house with 4 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms and a kitchen, you're not building 3 kitchens. So from their standpoint, it costs more, which is why they'd rather build a large one, because their return is higher.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't AB 602 make it so those impact fees are per square foot as opposed to per unit now?
That's a new one on me.
That's right.
That's a hard requirement.
Well, it is, but you can establish a reason to do it another way that makes sense. So there's some flexibility in AB 602, but that's the standard, and basically the state law that flows out of AB 602 says that we assume that charging impact fees based on your nexus study that's now required. If you do it by square feet, we assume that's the right way to do it, but you can convince us there's another good way to do it.
I got you. So the what Commissioner Kamkar was talking about, the thing where we have this inherent incentive for, I'm sorry, the thing that I forget who was talking about, we have this inherent incentive for larger units. That's not so much a thing anymore. But I do remember like the state of housing that we're short on small units, right? Like we have, if anything, a surfeit of larger units, and we need more studios and one bedrooms based on the size of households.
Yeah, we had a chart that showed that.
So which way goes, which one of these two plays to having more units with smaller? So we're looking for units here, actually apartments. Which one plays to that, and which one did the developers prefer? It was the second one.
I guess to put the best positive spin on it for the floor area ratio argument, I guess the argument there is just give us a maximum FAR. But that don't, okay, so if you had an FAR and not a density per acre, because we're showing both here, right? The floor area maximum for housing projects with a density over 45 dwellings per acre. So even with a floor area ratio that describes a maximum volume, you're still stuck with 45 dwellings per acre. The only way the floor area ratio works as a competing mechanism against the maximum average unit size is to get rid of dwelling units per acre and say you can have a building defined by the FAR and you can fill it up with as many units as you want, regardless of size.
And why does this only apply to more than 45 dwelling units per acre? Are we just basically saying this restriction we're only going to impose on those very high densities, right?
Correct. I think the thought is if you're building townhomes or single family detached, normally they're bigger units.
It's too restrictive.
Right. The one thing I'll say is the market rate developers thought this was too invasive. They thought, they got through their market studies, either on the average maximum average unit size, that either it would not move the needle or it'd be a little bit too invasive into their market studies. So that was the feedback from the market rate developers on this.
To be honest, it's probably just me. I'm confused. I don't understand this, and I couldn't offer an opinion, to be honest.
Well, okay, so if we look at like the numbers for the second one, so if it is 45 units per acre and an acre is 43,500 square feet, that would make each unit about 980 square feet on average. So what else? And that would be an FAR of 1. What FARs are we talking about proposing?
Steven, our number guy?
Yeah, I'll just broadly offer that we'd plan on studying that as part of the objective standards update. I mean, there's two different objectives here, right? FAR is controlling mass and bulk. Average unit size is ensuring that how do I put it? That you're not building 3,000 square foot units and you're just maxing out a big tower exceeding the city and exceeding the city's height limits. I mean, there's a secondary objective here I'll also mention. I mean, part of the reason why we're imposing this or suggesting this policy was on sites over 45 units per acre was also to address a secondary objective of the city council, which was to keep projects under 75 feet. So this is a secondary means of achieving the same, but as far as the housing policy goes, it also helps ensure affordability by design. I think we've gone around enough on that topic, but I just wanted to reiterate that is kind of the key distinction. You can have both, or you can have neither. You could have an FAR cap and an average maximum unit size, or you could have neither.
Well, it seems like having both would be even more restrictive, and we don't know what that number is that we're talking about. So it's hard to have a discussion without an actual FAR value to think through.
Well, if I can offer one, the word maximum gives us flexibility. We're saying that if, let's say, 1250 may be too limiting, let's say 1500, that's maximum. They don't have to go that, they don't have to go up that high. If it works for them, they can stay
They
lower.
want to go as high as they can.
Right, and I think our job is to give them flexibility if that's what they feel the market needs.
Well, I think
Or
that's
we-
kind of counter to adding more units, which is, well, I think we need to talk about what are our goals. So maybe rather than talking through like the specifics between these two, can we articulate, as planning commissioners, what we want to achieve for the city?
So
In my view, go ahead.
I guess I'll say it this way. So the FAR is really a different issue. That's not a housing. That's more form and objective designs. The only reason we presented this is because the developer said, looks like you're going in this direction and think about this tool instead. But I wouldn't say that's a housing element tool. The whole purpose here is to produce housing and housing units and affordable housing units, right? That's the objective. So for the commission, I put the floor area ratio aside. If there's feelings on that, we'll look at objective standards, whole separate track. That'll come back to you. So then the only question is, as an affordable housing tool, if Campbell moves down the road, because there has been some observation from staff and council members that these bigger projects have come in and the units are just bigger. They're 2,000, 3,000 square foot units, and understanding smaller units generally are affordable by design, number one. Number two, the argument the other way is we need family housing. But the objective here was it's an average, you could build some bigger units and some smaller units. But if we put a benchmark out there that, hey, we're not interested in 4,000 square foot units in your multifamily development, the max you can have is 1,250. Generally, that might result in more affordable by design units that come into our housing developments. So at this point, we don't have to overprescribe where this lands. Question is, should staff continue to evaluate this? Should it continue being the housing element? And we can have more to come on when the actual program comes back to adopt it, on actually adopting what that standard is.
I mean, this tool makes a lot of sense to me because, in the other example, you could have a 500 square foot studio, which then allows you to have a 2,000 square foot 4 bedrooms. So you really do have that flexibility. You probably wouldn't go to 3,000 square feet because doesn't average out unless you build many more studios at 500 to get to that larger unit. But that kind of distribution, if I looked at a histogram in my head, makes actually quite a bit of sense and does provide flexibility, but doesn't skew it such that we have all 4,000 square foot.
I'm impressed you can visualize a histogram in your head. Okay, so what you're suggesting is probably the far one is not so relevant here. I think
Correct. Yeah. From staff's perspective, I don't think you need to weigh into the FAR. It's just, do you think it's worth pursuing the first as a affordable output program? That's the intent. Is it worth continuing to pursue this?
Yes.
But it's only over 45 dwelling units. So anything under 45 dwelling units, you can.
Can I just suggest that we get some illustrations?
Could we just listen to
Sorry,
Commissioner?
Oh, sorry, I didn't have the floor. I'll finish my thought there. I get the intent. I can see where it's going, but then if you do
conversation, please.
If you did 44 dwelling units per acre, then you can do whatever you want with the unit size. So I don't know. This doesn't actually tell me a lot. It just seems arbitrary. That's my opinion.
And we'll go to
can I make a comment?
Vice
Go ahead,
Chair. Yeah, since I cut you off.
No, I'm done. Yeah, I guess the way I read this was, because we did this survey, we found that we were lacking smaller units and more affordable units, smaller and also more affordable. So if that's our goal, then this is a good thing to pursue, whether the 45 units per acre should be the arbitrary limit or not. That's
Yeah.
a different
I
question.
agree.
And I think from previous discussions, the what gets you affordable is the economies of scale. And you won't be able to achieve affordability trying to do it, townhouse style numbers or lower units per acre, because as someone said, the land is $3 million an acre. So to bring down the cost of each unit, you have to do it at the higher units per acre. And that's why this discussion is around that upper density segment.
Right. So Commissioner Ostrowski, are you in favour of the staff pursuing the first point?
Yes.
Okay, not exact
Aye.
numbers, but
Aye.
and that's what I'm hearing from Commissioner Cray. Commissioner Rivlin?
I think it might help to present it in a different style, or maybe a example of what this would do. Maybe a small chart with variable sizes, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, and show with that, not prescriptive that this is how it has to be built, but here's what it could look like. And I've seen those from staff in the past. Maybe it's just late in my mind, and now I have histograms bouncing around in my head. How many standard deviations are we? Okay.
So the answer, yes, but you would like to see it maybe in a different form, a complementary format.
My fellow commissioners are starting to make me understand it. So I'll be willing to proceed with it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Zissa.
Yeah, I would.
Thank you.
I would support that. I would support the average maximum unit sizes and consideration. I personally, this is talking about high-rise, high-density buildings from my perspective. And so we're talking whether it's rentals or condos. I don't want 3,000, 4,000 square foot places. I don't think that's what we're
right. So
looking for. So
you're
I'm looking
keen
for something
for
to
the
limit the
okay,
maximum
great.
unit size.
Thank you. Another aye, and before we go to the vice chair.
I don't have
Commissioner
to say
Kalikar.
honest.
Yeah.
So I also encourage or support using the maximum average unit size approach, and I recommend higher limits.
Okay. And vice chair. No, you're saying no, you hate all this.
I'm having trouble. I understand the thing we're going for. I do not understand the difference between these two. I approve of the idea. I could use an illustration of the difference between what these two things mean, because I really think these are two different ways of expressing the same idea, and I'm unsure of how they differ. But I agree with Commissioner Kamkar that if this is really an issue that we have people building 3,000 square foot units that are just in no way going to be affordable, that we should regulate this, but not make the ceilings super low, like provide a certain amount of flexibility.
So I think the consensus here is we would encourage staff to pursue this line of restricting the unit size, exact number, TBD, and maybe to have an alternative way of displaying it, and maybe putting the FAR in context, because I think that maybe caused some confusion.
Yeah, I think we'll develop some exhibits going forward so people understand this better.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, congratulations. With that, I think you've gotten through the top three. And so it would come down to, there's a lot of slides on affirmatively further fair housing. To you, Chair, and the Commission, if you'd like to get into those, or if you have burning notes that you wrote down that you'd like to give to us. And then the last point is, we're just trying to list a lot of the commitments we have on how we'll outreach to the community and notify them of programs we have. We've listed a bunch of avenues we've thought of. The last thought is if the Commission had some ideas on other avenues we hadn't thought of. So those are the last 2 points: affirmatively further fair housing and outreach.
I'm comfortable with what was written up and staff recommendations. I didn't have any notes on those two areas. I thought they were covered well.
Second.
Yeah, I would third that, but I guess I have I'll just make this quick point, and maybe it's a minor criticism, but a lot of times we talk about in the outreach doing more on our website, putting this on our website and this and that. I guess I don't know why we're not already doing that, or I just make that point. But I think what we have on the report was good ideas.
I'd like to second that. You know, a lot of times people would automatically go to your website to look things up. So if you can be a little bit more user-friendly with our website so they can find things, I think that would go a long way.
Do we do Facebook or Instagram?
We do, yeah. So for example, for this meeting, we did a social media push out through the cities.
Yeah.
I can't
I mean,
remember
the
that.
overhead of updating a website is a lot. And that's why people tend to go with these other platforms where you can just post your updates and it's literally instant. That's the only, probably the only reason is the.
I think you use Nextdoor as well, don't you?
That's
yeah,
correct.
and that's another kind of live update.
I haven't been a renter for a while. When I had a rental dispute and I went through a process with the city, and it was a lot of to do before the city told me we can't really do anything. But now the city can do things. We have renter protections. Given that, can we require landlords, maybe not small landlords that don't have offices, but basically if you rent from a complex, maybe there should be a know your rights notice in the office, something like that. Basically enumerating, you have the right to, be free from rent gouging and whatever else. Or like you can dispute your rent increases, and here's a link to the city, like talk to us about this. I think that's probably a really good way to get renters to know that they actually have rights.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that's good feedback.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Brookline, you're free from rent.
Gouging, I think.
Rent gouging, basically AB 1482.
Rent. And I think the scary thing was Commissioner Ostrowski and myself both thought of flying a blimp over the city exactly at the same time.
You better end this before someone proposes.
I was going to propose it. Okay, so anything else? Are we good? Can we adjourn?
Okay, with that, congratulations. So this is going to council next Monday. Between now and Monday, we'll summarize areas of consensus and general feedback and give that to the council. We'll take council direction. I think some of the learning points tonight, we'll try and put some tables together and exhibits for the council. And if it helps, we'll try and give those back to the commission at certain points. So at least things we're working on. All this feeds into us finalizing our draft housing on it, and we're targeted to publish that on May 20th. So I think that you won't see us on the housing element for a while. Things will go out into the public. We'll get feedback. They go to HCD. We have an EIR that's under preparation. That'll get published in July, but probably late summer. Oh, there it is. Late summer into October, we'll probably start to circle back with you on what we're hearing from HCD and public feedback. So, but congratulations, this gets through two key milestones. For the housing sites you got through in January, and the policies and programs as of now, and we'll move forward from there. So thanks.
Well, and just like to congratulate the staff for doing such a wonderful job, because the enormity of the task, right? You see it when I was looking through, wow, 30 pages of objectives and policies, and I know you're not overstaffed. So I think that's a tremendous achievement with everything going on. So plaudits to the team for doing that. Thank you.
Yeah, great job. And there's a planning commission meeting next week.
There is. So you've gotten through your special meeting, but there is a regular scheduled meeting on Tuesday. I think we have two items, and that packet should be out tomorrow.
At 7:30.
That's at 7:30. Yes.
Okay. So with that, thank you everybody, and I'll adjourn the meeting.